Hi everyone, welcome to Ricktopus. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to argue that Rick and Morty has become one of the most complex and layered animated series in television history, building a story that spans dimensions, timelines, and character arcs across multiple seasons. By tracing the show's evolution from its 2013 premiere through its major plot developments, key episodes, and character transformations, we can understand how this series about a genius scientist and his grandson became a sprawling narrative about family, consequence, identity, and what it means to matter in an infinite multiverse. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. Origins of Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty premiered on December 2nd, 2013 on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim programming block. The show was created by Dan Harmon, who had previously created the sitcom Community, and Justin Roiland, who provided the voices for both main characters. The series began with a relatively simple premise that would eventually expand into something much more complex and ambitious. A genius scientist named Rick Sanchez moves in with his daughter's family and starts taking his grandson Morty on dangerous adventures across space and dimensions. The show's origins trace back to an animated short that Justin Roiland created in 2006 called The Real Animated Adventures of Doc and Marty. This short was a crude parody of Back to the Future that Roiland made for Channel 101, a monthly short film festival in Los Angeles. Years later, when Roiland and Harmon began developing a show together, they transformed these characters into Rick and Morty, creating something original while maintaining the basic dynamic of a genius inventor and his young companion. Dan Harmon brought his experience with story structure and character development from Community to the new project. Harmon is known for using a story circle method based on Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. This approach to storytelling would influence how Rick and Morty episodes were structured, even as the show pushed boundaries in terms of content and tone. The combination of Roiland's anarchic humor and Harmon's focus on story structure created the foundation for what Rick and Morty would become. The pilot episode, titled Pilot, establishes the basic setup that would define the early seasons. Rick Sanchez is an elderly scientist with blue, spiky hair, a white lab coat, and a drinking problem. He's brilliant enough to build impossible technology in his garage, yet he's also clearly unstable and possibly dangerous. He moves into the home of his daughter Beth Smith, her husband Jerry Smith, and their two children, Summer and Morty. The family lives in a suburban house that looks completely normal from the outside, which creates immediate contrast with the chaos Rick brings into their lives. Beth Smith is Rick's daughter, a horse surgeon who clearly has unresolved issues with her father from his absence during her childhood. She's intelligent and capable in her own right, though she struggles with questions about whether she made the right choices in life. The show establishes that Rick was absent for most of Beth's life, leaving when she was young and not returning until the present day of the series. This abandonment created wounds in Beth that never fully healed. Now that Rick has returned, Beth is torn between wanting to maintain a relationship with him and recognizing that he might not be good for her family. Beth married Jerry Smith, who works in advertising and represents a more conventional, risk-averse approach to life. Jerry is frequently portrayed as less intelligent than other family members, which becomes a source of conflict throughout the series. He's insecure about his intelligence and his place in the family. Jerry often feels threatened by Rick's presence because Rick represents everything Jerry is not. The show makes Jerry sympathetic despite these limitations by showing that he genuinely loves his family and tries to do what he thinks is right. Summer Smith is the teenage daughter who starts the series as a typical teenager, concerned with popularity and social status. She's initially excluded from Rick and Morty's adventures, though this changes as the series progresses. Summer is more intelligent and capable than she initially appears. She's navigating the social complexities of high school while also dealing with her parents' troubled marriage and her grandfather's chaotic influence on the family. Morty Smith is the 14-year-old grandson who becomes Rick's constant companion on adventures. Morty is anxious, insecure, and not particularly intelligent by conventional measures. He struggles in school and has a crush on a classmate named Jessica that drives several early episodes. Morty has some cognitive limitation that makes traditional education difficult for him. His teachers don't think highly of his potential, and his grades are poor. He's a sensitive kid who cares about people and wants to do the right thing, even when he's not sure what the right thing is. The pilot episode shows Rick dragging Morty out of school in the middle of the night to help with a plan that Rick claims will benefit all of humanity. Rick has built a device that he insists will work, though the device's actual purpose remains unclear for most of the episode. Rick drives erratically while drinking from a flask. He talks about science and other dimensions in ways that Morty can't fully understand. The episode establishes that Rick doesn't care much about rules, safety, or conventional morality. Rick takes Morty through a portal to another dimension, where they need to collect seeds from a special tree. These mega seeds are supposed to be incredibly valuable, though Rick doesn't fully explain why. The portal Rick uses appears as a bright green oval that opens in the air, allowing instant travel to any location in any dimension. This portal gun becomes Rick's signature device throughout the series. While collecting the seeds, they're discovered by alien customs agents who chase them. Rick and Morty barely escape back through a portal to Earth. Back on Earth, Rick needs Morty to smuggle the mega seeds through interdimensional customs by hiding them in his rectum. This crude joke establishes the show's willingness to be vulgar and uncomfortable. The seeds start dissolving and give Morty temporary superintelligence. He becomes confident and capable, solving problems that normally would be beyond him. This temporary transformation foreshadows later episodes that explore what Morty could become under different circumstances. The pilot also establishes the family dynamics that drive much of the series. Jerry doesn't want Rick living with them because Rick is a bad influence on Morty. Jerry argues that Morty should be in school rather than going on dangerous adventures. He points out that Morty's grades are suffering because Rick keeps pulling him out of class. Beth defends her father, wanting to reconnect with him after years of absence. She tells Jerry that Rick is staying and that Jerry needs to accept it. This choice damages Beth and Jerry's marriage over time. Rick dismisses Jerry's concerns completely. He views Jerry as stupid and weak, someone not worth taking seriously. Rick makes this contempt obvious through constant insults and dismissals. Jerry resents Rick's presence and influence over his son. This antagonistic relationship between Rick and Jerry becomes a consistent element throughout the show. The pilot establishes that Rick has a portal gun, which is his signature device. The portal gun allows instant travel to any location in any dimension. This technology is central to everything the show does because it removes almost all constraints on where stories can go. Rick can visit alien worlds, alternate timelines, different dimensions, or any other location imaginable. The portal gun represents unlimited narrative possibilities. Early episodes after the pilot continue establishing the show's approach and tone. Lawnmower Dog features Rick building a device that lets people enter dreams, leading to an Inception-style plot about dreams within dreams. Rick builds a helmet that makes the family's dog Snuffles more intelligent, which backfires when Snuffles becomes intelligent enough to resent being treated as a pet. Meanwhile, Rick and Morty enter the dreams of Morty's math teacher to plant the idea that Morty is a good student. Anatomy Park involves Rick shrinking Morty and others down to microscopic size to explore the inside of a homeless man's body, which has been converted into a biological theme park. When the homeless man dies, Morty and others are trapped inside the body as it shuts down. They have to escape before they're killed by the body's immune system or by the decomposition process. Night Shame Aliens traps Rick in a simulation where aliens try to steal his portal gun technology. Rick sees through the simulation immediately because he's too intelligent to be fooled by its inconsistencies. This episode establishes Rick as someone who operates on a level above almost everyone else. He can detect simulations, outsmart alien intelligence, and generally stay several steps ahead of any threat. In Me Seeks and Destroy, Morty gets frustrated with Rick's choice of adventure and demands they do something Morty wants to do instead. They go on a fantasy adventure that goes horribly wrong, teaching Morty that his own choices can be just as dangerous as Rick's. The episode shows that Morty has agency and desires of his own, even if he's not always capable of achieving what he wants. These early episodes set up several patterns that become important later. Rick and Morty go on adventures that start with simple premises and spiral into chaos. The adventures often involve advanced technology, alien civilizations, or alternative dimensions. Things go wrong, people get hurt, and the situation becomes worse before it gets better. Rick uses his intelligence and technology to solve problems, though his solutions often create new problems. The show establishes its visual style and animation approach. The animation is relatively simple compared to major studio productions, with character designs that are distinctive and recognizable. Rick's design, with his unibrow, spiky hair, and perpetual drool, makes him instantly identifiable. The drool is a constant element of Rick's appearance, suggesting that he's always slightly drunk or that his body is deteriorating from substance abuse. The humor in early episodes combines several different styles. There's crude humor involving bodily functions and sexual references. There's science fiction humor that plays with genre conventions and references other works. There's dark humor about violence, death, and moral compromise. There's also character-based humor that comes from the family dynamics and personality conflicts. This mix of humor styles helps the show appeal to different audiences. Justin Roiland's voice work as both Rick and Morty is crucial to the show's identity. Rick's voice is raspy and often interrupted by burps. He talks fast and rambles, going off on tangents before returning to his point. Morty's voice is higher-pitched and anxious, with frequent stammering and stuttering. The vocal performances make the characters feel distinct and memorable. The first season establishes that adventures have real consequences, even if they're treated lightly at times. Characters die, sometimes in gruesome ways. Alien civilizations are destroyed. Timelines are altered. Relationships are damaged. The show doesn't completely reset after each episode, even though early seasons are mostly episodic. Small details carry forward, and characters reference previous adventures occasionally. By the end of Season 1, Rick and Morty had established itself as something unusual in animated television. The show combined science fiction concepts with family sitcom dynamics. It was crude and violent, while also being clever and creative. It told stories about infinite possibilities, while focusing on one specific family. The show had introduced core characters, established its tone and style, and set up the basic framework that would support increasingly complex storytelling in later seasons. The first season also planted seeds for future developments. Rick's mysterious past is hinted at through brief references and moments where his facade cracks. The existence of other Ricks and Mortys across dimensions is mentioned, suggesting a larger multiverse structure. Morty shows signs of being affected by his adventures in ways that accumulate over time. These elements would become increasingly important as the series progressed. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The show's early adventures seemed random and consequence-free, a pattern that would shatter completely in the Season 1 finale, when Rick's actions would have permanent effects that couldn't be undone. Section 2. The Croninberg World and Multiverse Beginnings. The sixth episode of Season 1, titled Rick Potion Number 9, represents the first major turning point in Rick and Morty's storytelling approach. This episode fundamentally changed what the show was and what it could become. Before this episode, Rick and Morty operated mostly as an episodic comedy, where adventures happened and then life returned to normal. After this episode, the show established that actions have permanent consequences, and that the multiverse would be more than just a setting for one-off adventures. The episode begins with a school dance approaching. Morty is desperate to get his crush Jessica to like him romantically. He's tried talking to her, being near her, and hoping she would notice him, yet none of these approaches have worked. Jessica is a popular girl who barely knows Morty exists. She's friendly when they interact, yet she sees Morty as just another classmate rather than as a potential romantic partner. Morty decides to ask Rick for help, which is usually a mistake. Rick agrees to help Morty by creating a love potion that will make Jessica attracted to Morty. Rick warns that the potion is powerful and needs to be used carefully. Rick creates the potion in his garage laboratory using various chemicals and alien substances. He gives Morty specific instructions about how to use it. Morty should use just a small amount, and he should make sure Jessica is the only one affected. Morty takes the potion to the school dance. He finds Jessica and manages to slip the potion into something she drinks or otherwise expose her to it. Jessica immediately becomes attracted to Morty, showing affection and interest that she never showed before. She wants to be close to Morty, wants his attention, wants to touch him and be touched by him. Morty is thrilled that his plan worked. He's finally getting the attention from Jessica that he's always wanted. Everything seems to be going exactly as he hoped. The problem emerges quickly. Jessica has the flu, and the episode makes a point of showing that she's sick. She sneezes near Morty while under the effects of the love potion. The potion becomes airborne when she sneezes, spreading through the air to other people nearby. The potion is now functioning like a contagious virus, passing from person to person through the air. Everyone who gets exposed to the airborne potion becomes attracted to Morty. Within minutes, multiple people at the dance are trying to get Morty's attention and affection. The situation escalates rapidly as more people become affected. Students at the dance start fighting over Morty, pushing each other aside to get closer to him. The behavior becomes increasingly aggressive and desperate. Morty realizes this has become a serious problem. He's surrounded by people who want him in ways that are frightening rather than flattering. Morty calls Rick to come fix the situation. Rick arrives and assesses what went wrong. The love potion mixed with Jessica's flu virus and became contagious. Now everyone exposed is becoming obsessed with Morty. Rick determines that the potion has spread beyond the school and is affecting people throughout the town. The problem is growing exponentially as each infected person can spread it to others. Rick decides he needs to create an antidote to reverse the love potion's effects. He goes back to his garage and starts working on a solution. Rick approaches this like a scientific problem that can be solved through proper understanding of the chemistry and biology involved. He analyzes the love potion's composition and determines what would counteract its effects. Rick creates what he thinks is an antidote based on vole DNA. Voles are small rodents known for forming monogamous pair bonds, so Rick uses their DNA to create a serum that should make people return to their normal relationship patterns. He releases this antidote into the atmosphere using some kind of dispersal device that spreads it across the town and eventually across the entire world. The antidote does reverse the love potion's effects. People stop being obsessed with Morty. They return to their normal emotional states, no longer feeling the artificial attraction that the potion created. For a moment, it seems like Rick's solution worked, and everything will return to normal. Morty is relieved that the nightmare situation is ending. However, the antidote has catastrophic unintended side effects. The vole DNA causes people to mutate physically. Their bodies begin transforming in grotesque ways. Limbs elongate or multiply. Faces distort. Bodies twist into shapes that aren't quite human anymore. The transformation is body horror that happens rapidly across the entire population. The show doesn't shy away from showing these transformations in disturbing detail. Rick recognizes that his antidote made things worse rather than better. He admits this mistake openly, though he doesn't seem particularly bothered by it emotionally. Rick treats this as a scientific failure that needs correction rather than as a moral catastrophe. He works quickly, knowing that every moment of delay means people are suffering in their mutated forms. Rick tries a second antidote using different DNA to reverse the mutations. This second antidote combines with the vole DNA already in people's systems. Chemical and genetic interactions occur that Rick didn't predict or account for. Instead of fixing the problem, the combination causes even more severe mutations. People transform into creatures that are even more grotesque and monstrous than before. The show refers to these creatures as Croninbergs, referencing director David Cronenberg, who is known for body horror films like The Fly and Videodrome. The Croninberg creatures are disturbing to look at. They have multiple limbs in wrong places, mouths where mouths shouldn't be, flesh that seems to move and shift on its own. They retain enough human features that you can tell they used to be people. The entire human population of Earth has now been transformed into Croninberg monsters. These creatures are aggressive and dangerous. They've lost most of their human intelligence and behavior, operating on instinct and impulse. The world has become a nightmare landscape of mutated beings roaming the streets. Morty is horrified by what his request for a love potion has caused. He sees the direct line from his selfish desire to make Jessica like him to the destruction of human civilization as it existed. Rick's solution to this problem reveals something crucial about his character and about how the show will operate going forward. Rick doesn't try to reverse the mutations or find a cure for the billions of Croninberg creatures. He doesn't even seem to consider this option. Instead, Rick explains that they're going to leave this dimension entirely and move to a different dimension where the problem doesn't exist. Rick uses his portal gun to search for a dimension with specific characteristics. Rick finds a dimension where another version of Rick and Morty successfully created a cure for the Croninberg problem. In that dimension, that reality's Rick and Morty face the same situation. They also made a love potion that spread and became contagious. They also tried to fix it with antidotes that made things worse. However, that dimension's Rick was smarter, or luckier, and he created a cure that actually worked. He reversed the mutations and restored everyone to normal human form. However, immediately after achieving this success, that dimension's Rick and Morty died in an unrelated accident. Rick explains this to Morty as they observe the other dimension. They watch as the other Rick and Morty work on a device in their garage. Something goes wrong with the device, and it explodes. The explosion kills both the other Rick and the other Morty instantly. Rick sees this as a perfect opportunity. That dimension's Earth is normal, and that dimension's family is fine, yet those particular Rick and Morty are dead. Our Rick and Morty can take the place of that dimension's Rick and Morty. No one will know the difference because Rick and Morty are virtually identical across dimensions. Rick takes Morty to this new dimension through a portal. They arrive in the garage just after the other Rick and Morty have died in the explosion. Rick tells Morty that they're going to take the place of this dimension's Rick and Morty. They need to dispose of the bodies and then act like they belong in this dimension. Morty is shocked and disturbed by this plan. Yet, he follows Rick's instructions because he doesn't see any alternative. They drag the corpses of their alternate selves out to the backyard. The bodies are heavy and awkward to move. They dig graves using shovels from the garage. Morty is forced to handle his own dead body, lifting it by the arms or legs and dragging it to the grave. He sees his own face on the corpse. He then has to bury himself, pushing dirt over his own corpse until it's completely covered. This experience is deeply traumatic for Morty. He's processing death in an immediate, physical way that most people never have to experience. He's looking at his own mortality made literal in the form of his own dead body. The episode shows Morty sitting in the backyard afterward, staring at nothing, clearly affected by what just happened. His hands are dirty from digging. He looks exhausted and emotionally shattered. Rick shows no emotional response to any of this. He's done this kind of thing before, based on his casual attitude about the situation. Rick treats burying alternate versions of themselves as a practical problem that needs solving, rather than as something emotionally significant. He doesn't comfort Morty or acknowledge the trauma of the situation. Rick and Morty then go inside and rejoin this dimension's version of their family. Beth, Jerry, and Summer are in the house, going about their normal activities. They have no idea that anything has changed. They don't know that their Rick and Morty died in the garage. From their perspective, everything is completely normal. Rick and Morty just came in from the garage like they've done countless times before. Rick and Morty act like nothing unusual happened. They sit down for family dinner with Beth, Jerry, and Summer. They pretend to be the Rick and Morty who belong in this dimension. The family accepts them without question, because there's no reason to suspect anything has changed. The episode ends with this new status quo established. Our Rick and Morty have abandoned their original dimension and original family. They're now living in a replacement dimension, pretending to be that dimension's Rick and Morty. The original Beth, Jerry, and Summer are still alive in the Croninberg dimension that Rick and Morty abandoned. That family has been left behind to deal with the monster-filled world that Rick and Morty created and then escaped from. This episode fundamentally changes several things about how Rick and Morty operates as a show. First, it establishes that Rick's solutions to problems can be morally questionable or outright wrong. Rick didn't fix the Croninberg problem. He ran away from it and found a universe where someone else had fixed it. He then stole that solution by replacing the Rick and Morty who actually did the work. Second, the episode shows that Rick is willing to abandon people, including his own family, when situations become too difficult or inconvenient. The original Beth is Rick's actual daughter. Rick leaves her in a nightmare world without hesitation. This reveals something dark about Rick's character and about his true relationship with his family. Third, the episode establishes that actions in Rick and Morty can have permanent consequences. The Croninberg dimension still exists somewhere in the multiverse. Later episodes show that the abandoned family adapted to their situation. Jerry and Beth became capable survivors in the monster-filled world. The show doesn't forget about the Croninberg dimension. Fourth, the episode introduces the concept that Rick and Morty themselves are not unique. There are infinite versions of them across infinite dimensions. Our Rick and Morty could be replaced, and no one would know the difference. If there are infinite Ricks and infinite Mortys, what makes any particular Rick or Morty special or important? Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The Croninberg incident proved Rick could escape any consequence by jumping dimensions, a power that would eventually attract the attention of other Ricks who had formed their own society with very different ideas about how to use the multiverse. Section 3. Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. The 10th episode of Season 1, titled Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, introduces concepts that would become central to Rick and Morty's larger mythology. This episode aired on April 7th, 2014, and it revealed that the multiverse contains not just infinite versions of Rick and Morty, yet also an organized society of Ricks who have banded together for purposes that aren't immediately clear. The episode also introduces a character who would become one of the show's most important antagonists, even though his significance wouldn't be fully understood until much later. The episode begins with Rick and Morty in the garage working on some project. Suddenly, a portal opens and several Ricks emerge, accompanied by Mortys. These Ricks are dressed in matching uniforms that look official and authoritative. They're part of what they call the Council of Ricks, which is a governing body that oversees Rick-related activities across multiple dimensions. The Council Ricks inform our Rick that he's under arrest for crimes against other Ricks. The specific crime is murder. Ricks across multiple dimensions have been killed, and the Council believes our Rick is responsible. They present evidence showing that our Rick's portal gun signature was detected at the scenes of these murders. Portal guns leave traces that can be tracked, similar to how guns in our world leave ballistic evidence. The Council has this tracking technology, and they've used it to identify our Rick as the suspect. Our Rick, who the show sometimes calls Rick C137 based on his dimension number, denies the charges. He insists he didn't kill anyone and that he's being framed. The Council Ricks don't believe him. They've investigated the evidence thoroughly, and everything points to Rick C137 as the killer. They take him into custody through a portal, bringing him to the Citadel of Ricks for trial. The Citadel of Ricks is an enormous structure that exists outside normal space and time. It's a place where Ricks from across the multiverse have gathered to create their own society. The Citadel has buildings, streets, businesses, and a functioning government. Thousands of Ricks live and work there. Each Rick looks essentially identical to every other Rick, making it difficult to tell them apart. The Citadel also has Mortys, who serve various functions in this Rick-dominated society. The episode reveals that in the multiverse governed by the Council, Ricks and Mortys have a specific relationship that goes beyond family. Mortys serve as camouflage for Ricks. The episode explains that a Morty's brainwaves somehow cancel out a Rick's genius brainwaves, making Ricks harder to detect or track when they have a Morty with them. This is presented as the real reason why Ricks take Mortys on adventures. The Mortys aren't companions or grandsons in any meaningful emotional sense. They're tools that Ricks use for practical purposes. This revelation recontextualizes everything about Rick and Morty's relationship. Our Rick has always claimed that he takes Morty on adventures because he enjoys Morty's company, or because Morty needs the experiences. The Citadel reveals that other Ricks view Mortys as disposable utilities. When a Rick's Morty dies or becomes unusable, the Rick can simply get a replacement Morty from another dimension. The Citadel even has facilities that assign Mortys to Ricks who need them. While Rick C137 is being held at the Citadel, Morty is sent home through a portal. However, Morty refuses to just accept what's happening. He believes Rick is innocent and wants to help prove it. Morty uses Rick's portal gun, which the Council Ricks somehow overlooked or didn't confiscate. Morty doesn't fully understand how the portal gun works, yet he manages to operate it enough to travel to the Citadel. At the Citadel, Morty encounters something unexpected. He finds other Mortys who are living there, separate from their Ricks. These Mortys have formed their own community on the Citadel. They've created a space where they can exist independent of Rick's control and expectations. One Morty in particular stands out. He's wearing an eye patch and seems more confident and articulate than most Mortys. The other Mortys treat this eye patch Morty with respect, suggesting he has some kind of leadership position. Eye patch Morty talks to our Morty about what it's like being a Morty in a multiverse full of Ricks. He explains that Mortys are seen as less important, less intelligent, and less valuable than Ricks. Mortys exist to serve Ricks, and the entire structure of the Citadel reinforces this hierarchy. Eye Patch Morty seems to understand this system very clearly and to resent it deeply. He speaks about Mortys deserving better treatment and about how Ricks underestimate Mortys constantly. Meanwhile, the real killer is revealed through the episode's investigation. Someone has been killing Ricks and framing Rick C137 for these murders. The killer has been using technology to mask their portal gun signature and make it appear as though Rick C137 was responsible. The Council eventually determines that Rick C137 is innocent, though they're slow to admit their mistake. The actual killer turns out to be another Rick, one who harbors intense resentment toward Rick C-137 specifically. This Rick is called Evil Rick, and he's been operating from a hidden base where he's been conducting experiments. When the Council and Rick C-137 track down Evil Rick's location, they discover something disturbing. Evil Rick has been torturing Mortys as part of some kind of twisted experiment or research project. The hidden base contains dozens of Mortys who have been subjected to terrible treatment. Some are restrained, others appear to have been experimented on, and the entire facility has a dark, horrifying atmosphere. This is the first time the show presents Mortys as victims on a large scale. Previous episodes showed individual Mortys experiencing trauma from adventures, yet this episode shows systematic abuse of Mortys by a Rick who sees them as completely expendable research subjects. Evil Rick confronts Rick C-137 and the Council, engaging in a fight that involves portal technology and weapons. During this confrontation, something crucial is revealed. Evil Rick isn't actually in control of his own actions. Someone else has been controlling Evil Rick remotely, using him as a puppet to carry out the murders and frame Rick C-137. Evil Rick's brain has been modified with technology that allows someone else to control his body and action. The episode reveals that the one controlling Evil Rick is a Morty. Specifically, it's the eye patch Morty that our Morty met earlier at the Citadel. This Morty, who would later become known as Evil Morty, has been orchestrating everything. He killed Ricks, framed Rick C-137, tortured other Mortys, and controlled another Rick like a puppet. All of this was part of some larger plan that the episode doesn't fully explain. When Evil Morty's control is exposed, he's at the Citadel surrounded by other Mortys. He blends back into the crowd of Mortys, removing his eye patch and looking like every other Morty present. The Council Ricks and Rick C-137 don't immediately realize which Morty was responsible. Evil Morty escapes by hiding in plain sight, using the fact that all Mortys look essentially identical to avoid detection. The episode ends with Evil Morty successfully escaping and the mystery of his motivations left unresolved. The show makes clear that this Morty is dangerous, intelligent, and has reasons for hating Ricks that go beyond normal Morty grievances. Evil Morty represents something new in the show's mythology. He's a Morty who refuses to accept the subordinate role that the multiverse has assigned to Mortys. He's willing to hurt other Mortys and kill Ricks to achieve his goals. This episode establishes several important elements for the show's future. First, it confirms that the multiverse is vast and organized. The Citadel exists as a functioning society with thousands of Ricks and Mortys. This isn't just a theoretical concept. The show presents an actual location where infinite versions of the main characters live together. Second, the episode reveals that not all Ricks are like Rick C-137. The Council Ricks are bureaucratic and rule-following. They've created a government structure with laws and enforcement mechanisms. They work together cooperatively rather than operating as lone individuals. This stands in contrast to Rick C-137, who rejects the Citadel and refuses to participate in their society. Rick C-137 is portrayed as unusual among Ricks for his independence and his refusal to join the Council. Third, the episode establishes that the relationship between Ricks and Mortys is more complex and darker than it initially appeared. Mortys serve a practical function for Ricks beyond just being grandsons. The multiverse has created a system where Mortys are treated as resources or tools rather than as people. This creates an inherent power imbalance that some Mortys, like Evil Morty, recognize and resent. Fourth, the episode introduces the concept of divergent Ricks and Mortys. While most Ricks and Mortys follow predictable patterns, some break from these patterns in significant ways. Evil Rick was unusual for being controlled by technology. Evil Morty is unusual for being intelligent enough and ruthless enough to challenge Ricks directly. These outliers suggest that the multiverse contains more variation than it might initially appear. The introduction of Evil Morty is particularly significant because it creates a long-term mystery for the show. The episode doesn't explain what Evil Morty wants or why he's doing what he's doing. It just establishes that he exists, that he's dangerous, and that he has escaped to continue pursuing his unknown goals. This sets up a storyline that the show would return to periodically over multiple seasons. The episode also reveals information about how Rick C-137 is perceived by other Ricks. The council considers him a rogue Rick who doesn't follow their rules. They're suspicious of him and quick to believe he might be killing other Ricks. This suggests that Rick C-137 has a reputation among other Ricks as someone difficult and potentially dangerous. Other Ricks don't trust him, even though he's essentially the same as them. The visual design of the Citadel is important for understanding the scale of the multiverse. The Citadel shows streets filled with identical Ricks going about daily business. There are Rick police officers, Rick politicians, Rick workers in various jobs. Mortys are present, serving Ricks in various capacities. The Citadel looks like a functional city, which drives home the point that there are truly infinite versions of these characters. The episode's ending, with evil Morty blending into a crowd of identical Mortys, creates a specific kind of horror. Evil Morty is still out there, somewhere in the multiverse. He looks like every other Morty. He could be anywhere. Any random Morty could potentially be evil Morty in disguise. This creates paranoia and uncertainty that extends beyond this single episode. The torture of Mortys, shown in Evil Rick's base, is presented as genuinely disturbing. The show doesn't play this for laughs or treat it lightly. The Mortys are shown suffering, restrained, afraid. This is presented as a horrific crime scene that reveals how low a Rick can sink when they stop seeing Mortys as people. The episode argues that the system which treats Mortys as tools enables this kind of abuse. Rick C-137's reaction to the Citadel is important for understanding his character. He clearly hates the Citadel and everything it represents. He insults the Council Ricks, mocks their bureaucracy, and makes clear that he wants nothing to do with their organized Rick society. Rick C-137 values his independence and sees the Council Ricks as having given up what makes Ricks unique by joining together and following rules. The episode raises questions about identity and individuality in a multiverse of infinite copies. If there are infinite Ricks who are essentially identical, what makes any individual Rick matter? The Council's existence suggests that many Ricks have concluded that individual identity doesn't matter much, which is why they're comfortable working together as interchangeable units. Rick C-137's rejection of the Council suggests he believes individual identity and choices do matter, even in an infinite multiverse. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The Council of Ricks represented order imposed on infinite chaos, yet their society contained its own dark corners where a single episode would later expose just how deeply the Citadel's hierarchies had corrupted both Ricks and Mortys. Section 4. The Ricklantis Mix-Up and Darker Lore. Season 3, Episode 7 of Rick and Morty, titled The Ricklantis Mix-Up, aired on September 10, 2017. This episode is considered by many fans and critics to be one of the show's best episodes. It was also one of the most ambitious episodes the show had attempted up to that point. The episode is set entirely at the Citadel of Ricks, with none of the main characters appearing. Instead, the episode follows various Ricks and Mortys who live at the Citadel, telling their stories and revealing what life is actually like in this society of infinite copies. The episode was advertised and marketed as Tales from the Citadel, suggesting it would be a fun anthology of stories from this location. What viewers got instead was something much darker and more serious than the marketing implied. The episode uses the Citadel as a way to explore themes about class, power, corruption, and what happens when society is built on fundamental inequality. The episode follows multiple storylines simultaneously, cutting between different characters and situations. One storyline follows a cop partnership between a Rick cop and a Morty cop. The Rick cop is older and more experienced, working his last day before retirement. The Morty cop is younger and idealistic, believing that police work is about helping people and maintaining justice. They're assigned to patrol together, and their relationship develops as they respond to various calls. The Rick cop is cynical and tired. He's seen everything the Citadel has to offer and has concluded that nothing really matters. He does his job mechanically without believing it makes any difference. The Morty cop believes he can make the Citadel better through honest police work and by treating everyone fairly. As they patrol, they encounter situations that challenge the Morty cop's idealism. They respond to a call about a Morty who has been eating his own feces. When they arrive, they find a Morty who has clearly had a mental breakdown of some kind. He's babbling about Rick and expressing resentment about how Mortys are treated. The Rick cop handles this with tired professionalism. The Morty cop is disturbed by seeing another Morty in this condition. The incident raises questions about what the Citadel does to Mortys psychologically. Later, the cop partners respond to a robbery at a store that specifically sells wafer cookies that taste like important memories. A Rick has stolen a wafer that contains the memory of him being truly alive. The thief explains that he's tired of existing in a society where every Rick is essentially the same. He wanted to remember what it felt like to be unique and individual. This storyline explores how living at the Citadel erodes individual identity, even for Ricks. Another storyline follows 4 Mortys who work in a factory making simple machines. The factory is dark, dirty, and clearly exploits its workers. The Mortys are paid very little and work long hours doing repetitive labor. They're essentially wage slaves trapped in a system that extracts value from their work while giving them nothing in return. One of these factory worker Mortys is nicknamed Slick Morty because he's cynical and tries to work as little as possible while still collecting his pay. The factory Mortys represent the working class at the Citadel. They have no power, no prospects for advancement, and no hope that their lives will improve. The system is designed to keep them in place doing necessary labor while the Ricks who own the factories profit from their work. This is a direct parallel to real-world labor exploitation and class systems. Slick Morty gets involved in a scheme with another Morty to steal copper wire from the factory and sell it. They plan to make extra money by taking materials that the factory owners won't miss. This petty theft is their way of fighting back against a system that exploits them. However, the scheme goes wrong when they're discovered by Simple Rick, a Rick who works at a factory making wafer cookies. Simple Rick is a Rick who chose a simple life. He decided not to pursue science or adventure. Instead, he married and had a daughter and lived a normal, happy domestic life. The Citadel captured this Rick and hooked him up to machines that harvest his memories of being happy with his daughter. These memories are then made into wafers that other Ricks buy so they can experience contentment and happiness by eating them. This is one of the darkest concepts the show presents. Simple Rick is being used as a literal happiness farm. He's kept alive and connected to machines that continuously extract his one genuine happy memory. Other Ricks consume this memory as a product. Simple Rick is enslaved and exploited in the most complete way possible. He's not even allowed to keep his own happiness. It's taken from him and sold to others. The factory Morty's theft disrupts the Simple Rick operation. In the chaos that follows, Simple Rick is freed from the machines. He attempts to escape but is killed by factory security. His death means nothing to the Citadel. The factory simply finds a replacement Rick with happy memories and continues the operation. One Rick is interchangeable with another Rick for purposes of memory harvesting. Another storyline follows a Morty student at a school on the Citadel. This Morty, nicknamed Candidate Morty, is running for student council president. He campaigns on a platform of equality between Ricks and Mortys. He gives speeches about how Mortys deserve the same rights and opportunities as Ricks. He argues that the current system is unfair and needs to change. Most Mortys dismiss him as unrealistic or naive. Candidate Morty wins the school election despite the skepticism. He gives a victory speech where he talks about the importance of Mortys standing up for themselves. He seems genuine in his beliefs and his desire to make things better. The other Mortys are inspired by his message. This storyline seems to be about hope and the possibility of change within the system. The final major storyline involves presidential elections at the Citadel. The Citadel is holding elections to choose a new president who will lead their society. Various Ricks are running for president, making speeches and campaigning. The election is presented as meaningful and important for determining the Citadel's future direction. The campaigns focus on issues affecting Ricks specifically, with little mention of Morty's concerns. These multiple storylines converge as the episode reaches its conclusion. The Rick cop is about to retire when he and his Morty partner encounter a situation that goes wrong. The Morty cop is shot and killed in the line of duty. The Rick cop, who had been cynical about everything, is genuinely affected by his partner's death. He realizes too late that he cared about this Morty, and that his cynicism prevented him from expressing it. The presidential election concludes with an unexpected result. Candidate Morty, the student who won the school election, has somehow become a presidential candidate. He wins the presidential election, becoming the first Morty president of the Citadel. This seems like a triumphant moment representing fundamental change in the power structure. A Morty will now lead a society that has always been dominated by Ricks. However, the episode's final scenes reveal the truth. Candidate Morty is shown alone in his office after winning the presidency. He removes his eye patch, revealing that he's Evil Morty, from the much earlier episode, Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. Evil Morty has been playing a long game. He disguised himself as an idealistic student, ran for school president to build credibility, and used that platform to ultimately win the presidency of the entire Citadel. The episode shows Evil Morty's true nature in his first acts as president. He has his security team round up his political opponents and dissidents. These Ricks and Mortys are taken to an airlock and ejected into space, killed immediately. Evil Morty is purging anyone who might challenge his authority. He's not an idealistic reformer. He's a calculating authoritarian who used the language of reform to gain power. The final shot shows numerous bodies floating in space around the Citadel. These are the Ricks and Mortys that Evil Morty had killed. The episode ends with the knowledge that Evil Morty now controls the Citadel, and has already shown he's willing to kill anyone who threatens his rule. The Society of Infinite Ricks and Mortys is now led by perhaps the most dangerous individual in the entire multiverse. This episode works on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, it tells engaging stories about different characters at the Citadel. Each storyline has its own arc and emotional beats. The cop story is a buddy cop narrative about an idealist and a cynic. The factory story is about labor exploitation. The student story is about political hope. All of these stories work individually as entertainment. On a deeper level, the episode is social commentary about inequality, class systems, and how societies maintain hierarchies. The Citadel is structured so that Ricks have power and Mortys don't. This inequality is built into every aspect of how the Citadel functions. The schools train Mortys to accept subordinate roles. The police force maintains order that benefits Ricks. The factories extract labor from Mortys for Rick owners' profit. The political system gives Ricks voting power, while Mortys are mostly excluded. The episode shows how even well-meaning individuals can't change unjust systems from within. The Morty cop believes in justice and fairness, yet he's killed while enforcing a system that's fundamentally unjust. The factory Mortys try to resist through small acts of theft. Yet the system crushes their resistance and continues unchanged. Candidate Morty campaigns on change, yet he's actually using the language of reform to gain power for his own purposes. The episode argues that the Citadel is irredeemable. The society is so thoroughly corrupt and so deeply unequal that reform is impossible. The only person who successfully changes the Citadel is Evil Morty, and he does it by becoming an authoritarian dictator who kills his enemies. The episode suggests that societies built on fundamental inequality can't be fixed through normal political processes. The comparison to real-world issues is intentional. The show's creators have discussed how this episode was meant to comment on economic inequality, labor exploitation, and political corruption. The Citadel represents any society where a privileged class maintains power over an underclass. The specific details about Ricks and Mortys are sci-fi window dressing on top of commentary about actual social structures. The simple Rick storyline is particularly effective at illustrating how capitalism extracts value from everything, even personal memories and emotions. Simple Rick's happiness becomes a commodity that can be bought and sold. His inner emotional life becomes product inventory. He's reduced to a machine for producing experiences that other people consume. This is a metaphor for how economic systems commodify every aspect of human existence. Evil Morty's reveal recontextualizes everything about his character. The idealistic speeches he gave as Candidate Morty weren't genuine beliefs. They were tools he used to gain followers and win elections. He understood that Mortys wanted to believe change was possible, so he gave them that hope. Once he gained power, he immediately revealed his true nature by killing anyone who might resist his rule. The episode raises questions about whether Evil Morty is a villain or a symptom of a broken system. He's certainly ruthless and murderous, yet he's also a Morty who recognized that the Citadel was designed to oppress Mortys and decided to seize power rather than remain oppressed. The episode doesn't fully answer whether we should see him as evil or as a revolutionary responding to an unjust system. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Evil Morty had conquered the Citadel through manipulation and violence. Yet his rise to power was only one part of a larger story about how Rick's adventures were beginning to leave deeper marks on the family he claimed not to care about. Section 5. Wedding Squanchers and Galactic Threats. The Season 2 finale of Rick and Morty, titled The Wedding Squanchers, aired on October 4th, 2015. This episode represents a major turning point in the series, where the consequences of Rick's past finally catch up to him and his family. The episode introduces the Galactic Federation as a major threat and reveals that Rick's life of adventure and crime has created powerful enemies who are willing to hurt the people around him to get to him. The episode begins with the Smith family preparing to attend a wedding. Bird Person, Rick's old friend who has appeared in previous episodes, is getting married to a woman named Tammy. Tammy is a girl from Summers High School who somehow met Bird Person and began a relationship with him. The age difference and the strangeness of their pairing is acknowledged in the episode, yet Bird Person seems genuinely happy about getting married. The wedding takes place on Bird Person's home planet, which has an alien landscape and architecture. Numerous guests attend the wedding, including many of Rick and Bird Person's old friends from their past adventures. These are aliens and beings from various species who all seem to know Rick from years ago. The wedding brings together people from Rick's past that the Smith family has never met before. During the wedding reception, various characters give speeches and toasts. These speeches reveal information about Rick's past that the family didn't know. Rick and Bird Person fought together in a war against the Galactic Federation. They were part of a rebellion that opposed the Federation's control over large portions of the galaxy. This rebellion happened years before the show's present day, when Rick was younger and apparently more idealistic. The Galactic Federation is presented as a massive government organization that controls numerous planets and dimensions. They have vast military resources and they enforce their laws across their territory. The Federation views Rick as a criminal and a terrorist because of his actions during the rebellion. Rick helped destroy Federation property, killed Federation soldiers, and generally caused problems for their operations. Bird Person's wedding speech provides context for his relationship with Rick. Bird Person explains that in his language, the word wubba-lubba-dub-dub, which Rick says frequently throughout the series, actually means, "I am in great pain, please help me." This reveals that Rick's catchphrase, which seemed like nonsense, is actually a cry for help that Rick disguises as a joke. Bird Person recognizes Rick's pain and considers him a true friend despite Rick's difficult personality. Another character named Squanchy is also at the wedding. Squanchy is an alien who looks like a small, cat-like creature. He's another of Rick's old friends from the rebellion days. Squanchy is friendly and seems to care about Rick genuinely. The presence of these old friends shows that Rick once had deeper relationships and was part of a community of rebels fighting for something they believed in. The wedding celebration is interrupted when Tammy stands up to give a speech. She reveals that she's not actually in love with Bird Person. Tammy is an undercover agent working for the Galactic Federation. Her entire relationship with Bird Person was a deception designed to get close to Rick and his associates. The wedding was a trap to gather all of the rebels in one location where the Federation could capture or kill them. Tammy pulls out a weapon and shoots Bird Person multiple times in the chest. Bird Person collapses and appears to die in front of everyone. The wedding guests panic and try to escape. Federation soldiers emerge from portals and begin attacking. They're trying to kill or capture everyone at the wedding. The celebration becomes a massacre as Federation forces open fire on the fleeing guests. Rick grabs his family and tells them they need to leave immediately. They run through the chaos as Federation soldiers shoot at aliens around them. Squanchy stays behind to fight the Federation soldiers and give Rick and the Smith family time to escape. Squanchy injects himself with some kind of substance that makes him grow to enormous size and become incredibly strong. He attacks the Federation forces while screaming for Rick to run. Rick gets his family through a portal back to Earth. They arrive at their house, yet Rick knows they can't stay there. The Galactic Federation knows where Rick lives, and they'll be coming for him. The family needs to go on the run and hide somewhere the Federation can't find them. Rick starts gathering supplies and making preparations to leave their dimension entirely. The family is in shock from what just happened. They saw Bird Person shot and likely killed. They witnessed a massacre at what was supposed to be a celebration. They learned that Rick has enemies powerful enough to infiltrate his friend's wedding and willing to kill everyone there to get to Rick. The comfortable life they've been living is suddenly revealed to be built on a foundation of danger that Rick's past created. Jerry is particularly upset about the situation. He argues that this is exactly what he's always feared about Rick living with them. Rick's presence has put the entire family in danger. Jerry insists that Rick should leave and let the family return to their normal lives. He believes that without Rick, the Federation would have no reason to target them. Beth defends Rick initially, yet even she seems shaken by the violence they just witnessed. Rick realizes that Jerry is partially right. As long as Rick is with the family, the Galactic Federation will hunt them. The Federation wants Rick badly enough that they're willing to hurt or kill his family to capture him. Rick makes a decision. He goes to get some equipment from his garage, telling the family to prepare to leave. The family assumes Rick is planning their escape to another dimension where they can all hide together. Instead, Rick goes outside and surrenders to the Galactic Federation. Federation ships arrive at the house, and Rick walks out with his hands raised. He tells the Federation soldiers that he's turning himself in on the condition that they leave his family alone. Rick negotiates that the family will be pardoned for any crimes related to him and that they can return to their normal lives. The Federation agrees to these terms. The family watches from the window as Rick is taken into custody. Rick is placed in restraints and taken onto a Federation ship. He's being transported to a Federation prison where he'll likely spend the rest of his life. Rick looks back at the house one time before the ship leaves. He doesn't say goodbye or give any emotional speech. He just goes with the Federation soldiers to protect his family from the consequences of his past. This ending shocked viewers because it seemed impossible for the show to continue. Rick is in prison, and the family is back to normal life without him. The show is called Rick and Morty, yet Rick is now separated from Morty and locked away. The season ended on this cliffhanger, with no clear path forward for how the show would resolve the situation. The episode reveals several important things about Rick's character and history. First, Rick once cared about political causes enough to fight in a rebellion. The younger Rick was part of a group trying to oppose the Galactic Federation's control. This suggests Rick once had ideals and was willing to fight for them alongside other people. He was part of a community of rebels working together toward a common goal. Second, Rick values his old friends in ways he doesn't fully express. Bird Person and Squanchy matter to Rick. He attended Bird Person's wedding, even though he must have known it was risky to gather so many former rebels in one place. When the trap is sprung and his friends are killed or endangered, Rick is visibly affected, even though he doesn't verbally express his emotions. Third, Rick's past has created consequences that he can't simply portal away from. The Galactic Federation has vast resources and reach across multiple dimensions. They tracked Rick to Bird Person's wedding and infiltrated it with an agent. They know where Rick lives. They're willing to kill innocent people to capture him. Rick can run to other dimensions, yet the Federation will keep pursuing him and endangering anyone near him. Fourth, Rick is capable of genuine sacrifice. He surrenders himself to protect his family, even though it means imprisonment for life. Rick could have taken the family and run to another dimension. He could have fought the Federation forces. Instead, he gives himself up because he recognizes that his presence makes his family targets. This is the first time in the series where Rick makes a completely selfless choice that costs him everything. The Galactic Federation is presented as a credible threat that Rick can't simply outsmart or overpower. They have armies, fleets of ships, advanced technology, and control over large portions of the galaxy. They've been hunting Rick for years and have finally cornered him. The Federation represents order and law enforcement on a galactic scale, which makes them antagonistic to someone like Rick, who values freedom and chaos. Tammy's betrayal of Bird Person is particularly cruel because it reveals how deeply the Federation infiltrated the rebel community. Tammy spent months, or possibly years, pretending to be in love with Bird Person. She attended high school with Summer, integrated herself into normal life, and built a relationship with Bird Person, all as part of her mission. She was willing to marry him as part of maintaining her cover. When she reveals her true identity and shoots him, she shows no remorse or emotional conflict. She was just doing her job the entire time. The episode establishes that the rebellion Rick participated in happened many years ago. Rick is elderly in the present day, yet the rebellion was when he was younger and presumably more energetic. This means Rick has been running from the Federation and living as a fugitive for decades. His entire adult life has been shaped by his decision to rebel against the Federation and the consequences that followed from that choice. Squanchy's sacrifice to buy Rick escape time shows the loyalty that Rick's old friends have for him. Squanchy injects himself with something that transforms his body and likely causes permanent damage or death. He does this without hesitation because Rick is his friend and needs to escape. The old rebels maintain their bonds and are willing to die for each other, even years after their rebellion ended. The episode also shows how Rick's adventures have isolated him emotionally. He has old friends from his past like Bird Person and Squanchy, yet in his current life, Rick keeps everyone at distance. He doesn't let the Smith family get too close emotionally. He maintains a facade of not caring about anyone or anything. Bird Person's revelation about Wubba Lubba Dub Dub shows that Rick has been signaling his pain the entire time in a way that only people who truly know him can understand. Beth's reaction to Rick surrendering is important for understanding their relationship. Beth has spent the series defending Rick's presence in the family, despite Jerry's objections. She's prioritized her father over her husband repeatedly. When Rick is taken away, Beth is devastated. She finally had her father back in her life after years of absence, and now he's being taken away again. This time she knows it's permanent, and that Rick chose to leave to protect her. Summer and Morty are also affected differently by Rick's surrender. Summer has grown closer to Rick over the course of the series and has gone on adventures with him. She's seen Rick as a source of excitement and escape from boring suburban life. Morty has the most complex relationship with Rick. He's been traumatized by adventures, yet also feels attached to Rick. He understands Rick better than most people because they spend so much time together. The episode ends with the family in their house, safe from the Federation, yet without Rick. Jerry is relieved that Rick is gone and the danger has passed. Beth is heartbroken and angry. Summer and Morty are processing what just happened. The family dynamics are fractured by Rick's absence. The house feels different without Rick's chaotic presence. Normal life returns, yet it feels hollow after everything they experienced. The Season 2 finale fundamentally changed Rick and Morty's status quo. The show couldn't simply continue with episodic adventures after Rick surrendered to the Federation. The situation needed to be resolved somehow. Viewers spent months between seasons wondering how the show would handle Rick's imprisonment, and whether Rick and Morty would be able to continue having adventures together. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Rick's imprisonment seemed to end his story completely. Yet when the show returned months later, the Season 3 premiere would reveal that Rick had been planning his escape from the moment he surrendered, along with truths about his past that recontextualized everything the show had established about who he was and why he acts the way he does. Section 6. Rick Shank Redemption and Identity. The Season 3 premiere of Rick and Morty, titled The Rick Shank Redemption, aired on April 1st, 2017, as an April Fool's Day surprise. The episode had been highly anticipated because of how Season 2 ended with Rick in Federation custody. Fans had spent over a year speculating about how Rick would escape from prison, and whether the show would pick up immediately after the Season 2 finale or jump forward in time. The episode answered these questions while also revealing important information about Rick's backstory. The episode begins with Rick in a Galactic Federation prison. He's being held in a high-security facility designed to contain the most dangerous criminals in the Federation's territory. Rick is in a special cell where he's connected to machines that allow Federation interrogators to enter his memories and extract information. The Federation wants the formula for portal travel. If they can learn how Rick creates portal technology, they can use it for their own purposes. A Federation agent named Cornelius Daniel is assigned to extract the portal formula from Rick's mind. The Federation has determined that the formula is somewhere in Rick's memories. Cornelius enters Rick's mind using the memory exploration technology. He can see Rick's memories as if he's living through them himself. He searches through Rick's past, looking for the moment when Rick invented portal travel. Cornelius finds a memory that appears to show Rick's origin story. In this memory, Rick is younger and looks different from his current appearance. He has black hair instead of blue-gray hair. He's thinner and more energetic. Most importantly, Rick is happy. He's living a normal domestic life with his wife Diane and their young daughter Beth. They have a house in what appears to be a normal suburban neighborhood. Rick is working in a garage, yet he's not doing advanced science. He's just tinkering with regular projects. Another Rick appears through a portal in the garage. This other Rick tells our Rick about portal technology and shows him how it works. The other Rick explains that infinite universes exist, and that portal travel allows movement between them. The other Rick tries to recruit our Rick to join him in exploring the multiverse and doing science across dimensions. Our Rick refuses. He's happy with his simple domestic life and doesn't want to leave his family to go on adventures. The other Rick becomes angry at this rejection. He pulls out a device and drops it on the ground. The device is a bomb. Our Rick realizes what's about to happen, yet can't stop it. The bomb explodes, destroying the garage and part of the house. When the explosion clears, Rick finds that his wife Diane and daughter Beth have been killed by the blast. The other Rick murdered Rick's family because Rick refused to join him. This memory shows Rick completely devastated by the loss. He's holding Diane's body and screaming. Everything he cared about has been taken from him in an instant by another version of himself. This trauma is presented as the origin of Rick's personality. He was once happy and normal, yet the murder of his family transformed him into the cynical genius viewers know. Rick then dedicated his life to hunting down the Rick who killed his family. The memory continues, showing Rick inventing portal technology himself. He becomes obsessed with finding the Rick who murdered his family. He travels across dimensions searching for the killer. He develops all his scientific knowledge and technological capabilities in service of this revenge quest. Years pass in the memory, with Rick moving through different dimensions, building weapons, and hunting for the other Rick. Cornelius watches this memory and believes he's seeing the truth of Rick's past. He thinks he understands Rick's motivations and the origin of the portal formula. However, Rick reveals that this entire memory was fabricated. Rick created a false memory and tricked Cornelius into entering it. The memory was designed to manipulate the Federation agent and make him think he was learning Rick's secrets. While Cornelius is trapped in the fabricated memory, Rick uses the connection between their minds to take control of Cornelius's body. Rick transfers his consciousness from his imprisoned body into Cornelius's body. He's essentially hijacking the Federation agent's body and leaving his own body behind. This is Rick's escape plan. He knew the Federation would try to extract information from his memories, and he prepared a trap that would let him take over whoever entered his mind. Rick, now in Cornelius's body, escapes from the prison. He moves to the facility, killing or incapacitating guards. He reaches a portal gun storage area where the Federation keeps confiscated portal technology. Rick steals a portal gun and uses it to travel away from the prison. The Federation realizes what happened and tries to stop him, yet Rick is already gone. Meanwhile, Earth has been dealing with the Galactic Federation's presence for the months since Rick surrendered. The Federation has occupied Earth and integrated it into their territory. Federation soldiers patrol the streets, Federation currency has replaced human money, Federation laws are being enforced. The Smith family has been living under Federation rule, trying to adjust to this new reality. Jerry is actually happy with the Federation occupation. The Federation has given him a job where he's successful and valued. Federation society seems to reward Jerry in ways that human society never did. He's making more money and has more status than he ever had before. Jerry sees the Federation as an improvement over the chaotic world that existed when Rick was around. Beth, Summer, and Morty are not happy with the Federation occupation. They miss Rick and they resent the Federation for taking him away. They also dislike living under Federation control with alien soldiers everywhere and Federation rules governing their lives. The family is split between Jerry's acceptance of the new order and Beth's resentment of it. Rick appears at the house through a portal. He's still in Cornelius's body at this point. The family is shocked to see him. Rick explains that he's escaped from prison and that he needs their help to get his body back. Rick has a plan to not just escape, but to completely destroy the Galactic Federation's government and free Earth from their occupation. Rick's plan involves hacking into the Galactic Federation's central financial system. The Federation's economy is based on a currency system that requires constant maintenance and verification. Rick discovered a way to hack this system and change the value of Federation currency. He can make their money completely worthless, which would collapse their economy instantly. Without a functioning economy, the Federation's government would fall apart. Rick uses Morty and Summer's help to access Federation computer systems. He transfers himself back into his original body through technological means. Once back in his own body, Rick executes his plan to collapse the Federation economy. He changes a single value in their financial system that causes the currency to become valueless. Within minutes, the Federation's economy implodes. The Federation currency instantly becomes worthless across all Federation-controlled territory. Federation soldiers on Earth realize they're not being paid anymore. Federation businesses close. The entire structure of Federation society crumbles because it was built on an economic system that Rick destroyed with a few keystrokes. The Federation retreats from Earth and from their other territories. Their government collapses into chaos. The episode also shows what happened at the Citadel of Ricks after the Federation attack on Bird Person's wedding. The Citadel had been staying neutral in the conflict between Rick C-137 and the Federation. After the wedding massacre, the Citadel decided to merge with the Galactic Federation for protection. The Council of Ricks agreed to work with the Federation in exchange for the Federation leaving the Citadel alone. When Rick collapses the Federation, the Citadel is also affected. The Council of Ricks who made the deal with the Federation are discredited. Chaos breaks out at the Citadel as different factions fight for control. This creates the conditions that evil Morty would later exploit to gain power, though that happens in later episodes. Rick returns the family to their house on Earth, which is now free from Federation control. Jerry is upset because the Federation occupation was good for him, and now that's gone. Beth is relieved to have Rick back, yet also worried about what his return means for her marriage. Morty and Summer are glad Rick escaped, yet also traumatized from their role in helping him destroy an entire government. The final scene of the episode shows Rick, Morty, and Summer at a fast food restaurant called Shoney's. Rick is ranting about wanting Szechuan sauce, which was a promotional sauce that McDonald's made for the Mulan movie in 1998. Rick claims that his entire motivation for everything he did, including escaping prison and collapsing the Federation, was to get this sauce again. He says this is his series arc, and that getting the sauce is what drives him. Rick then reveals more about his actual motivations. He tells Morty that he's going to take over the family completely. He's going to push Jerry out and make himself the patriarch. Rick wants Beth to divorce Jerry so that Rick can have full control over the household. He sees this as taking what he deserves after sacrificing himself to protect the family. This episode is significant for multiple reasons. First, it shows Rick at his most competent. He escapes from a maximum security prison, tricks the Federation into letting him access their systems, and destroys their entire civilization in one day. Rick demonstrates why he's considered the most dangerous person in the galaxy. His intelligence and capabilities are genuinely threatening to massive government organizations. Second, the episode provides Rick's origin story while also making viewers question whether it's true. The backstory about Diane and Beth being killed is presented as a fabricated memory that Rick created to trick Cornelius. Yet, later episodes suggest that at least some elements of this backstory are real. The show creates ambiguity about what actually happened in Rick's past. The death of Rick's wife and daughter would explain why Rick is the way he is. If this backstory is true, Rick experienced devastating trauma that destroyed his family and his capacity for normal happiness. He spent years hunting for revenge and developing his scientific capabilities. By the time he gave up the hunt, or completed it, he had become the cynical, detached person viewers see in the show. However, the episode makes clear that Rick fabricated this memory to manipulate someone. This means viewers can't trust that the backstory is real. Rick might have created an emotionally effective lie based on partial truths, or he might have fabricated the entire thing. The show refuses to confirm which parts of Rick's backstory are real and which parts are lies he tells. Third, the episode establishes Rick as willing to destroy entire civilizations to achieve his goals. The Galactic Federation governed vast territories across multiple dimensions. Billions or trillions of beings lived under Federation rule. Rick collapsed their government, which would cause massive suffering and chaos across all Federation territory. Rick did this without apparent concern for the consequences to anyone except his family. Fourth, the episode reveals Rick's desire for control over his family. Rick wants to be the patriarch, the person who makes decisions and rules the household. He wants Beth to divorce Jerry so that Rick can have Beth's loyalty exclusively. This desire for control contradicts Rick's stated philosophy of not caring about anything. If Rick truly didn't care, he wouldn't care about being in charge of the family. The Szechuan sauce speech became famous among fans and created a real-world controversy when McDonald's brought the sauce back for a limited time. Some Rick and Morty fans behaved badly while trying to get the sauce, which created negative publicity for the show. The sauce became a symbol of toxic fan behavior, even though the episode was satirizing this kind of obsessive behavior. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Rick had dismantled the Federation and reclaimed his family, yet this victory came at the cost of revealing how far he would go to maintain control, a pattern that would become increasingly clear as his conflicts moved from external enemies to the most fractured relationships within his own household. Section 7. Evil Morty and Multiverse Tension. Evil Morty's story spans multiple seasons and represents one of the most significant ongoing narratives in Rick and Morty. After his introduction in Season 1's close Rick counters of the Rick kind, and his ascension to power in Season 3's The Ricklantis Mix-Up, Evil Morty becomes the central figure in exploring what the multiverse actually means for Ricks and Mortys as individuals. His arc culminates in Season 5's finale, titled Rick Mirai Jack, which aired on September 5th, 2021, where he executes a plan that fundamentally changes the show's understanding of its own multiverse. Between the Ricklantis Mix-Up and Rick Mirai Jack, Evil Morty doesn't appear in episodes directly. However, his presence is felt through references to the Citadel and through the knowledge that he's ruling the society of infinite Ricks and Mortys. The show occasionally mentions the Citadel and shows brief glimpses of it functioning under Evil Morty's leadership. These glimpses suggest that Evil Morty has consolidated his power and is working towards some larger goal that hasn't been revealed yet. Rick Mirai Jack brings Evil Morty back into focus as the main antagonist. The episode takes place partly at the Citadel, where Evil Morty has been ruling as president. The episode reveals that Evil Morty has been secretly working on a massive construction project. He's been using the Citadel's resources to build something enormous that exists outside the normal dimensional structure. The other Ricks at the Citadel don't know what he's building or why. The episode also follows Rick C-137 and Morty as they deal with their own problems. Rick and Morty's relationship has been strained throughout Season 5. Morty is tired of adventures and tired of being treated as subordinate to Rick. He wants more respect and more say in what they do. Rick continues to treat Morty dismissively, which creates tension between them that builds throughout the season. Rick takes Morty to a place called the Citadel to confront something from Rick's past. While there, they encounter Evil Morty's plan as it reaches completion. Evil Morty has been building what he calls a, quote, dimensional rift cannon. This device is designed to destroy the barrier that separates the central finite curve from the rest of the multiverse. The central finite curve is a crucial concept that the episode explains for the first time. The central finite curve is revealed to be an artificial boundary that isolates certain dimensions from all other dimensions. Specifically, the central finite curve only includes dimensions where Rick is the smartest person in the universe. Every dimension inside the curve shares this characteristic. Rick invented portal travel, Rick is the most intelligent being, and Rick dominates his reality through his genius. The curve was created deliberately to wall off these Rick-dominated dimensions from dimensions where Rick isn't special, or where Rick doesn't exist at all. The episode reveals that Rick didn't create the central finite curve alone. Many Ricks worked together to build this barrier and trap themselves inside it. They did this because they wanted to live in universes where they were guaranteed to be the smartest and most important people. They couldn't handle existing in universes where they might be ordinary or less significant. The central finite curve is essentially a prison that Ricks built to protect their egos. This revelation recontextualizes everything about the show. Every adventure Rick and Morty have been on happened inside the central finite curve. Every dimension they visited was one where Rick was the smartest person. The infinite possibilities that the show presented were actually limited possibilities within an artificial boundary. The multiverse is much larger than what the show has depicted, yet Rick has been confined to a small section of it where he's guaranteed to be special. Evil Morty's goal is to escape the central finite curve. He wants to leave the section of the multiverse where Ricks dominate and go somewhere else entirely. He's willing to destroy the curve and kill anyone who tries to stop him. Evil Morty's motivation is revealed through his actions and through brief dialogue. He's tired of living in universes defined by Rick's ego. He wants to exist in a reality where Rick doesn't matter and where Mortys aren't automatically subordinate to Ricks. Evil Morty activates his dimensional rift cannon. The device begins tearing apart the barrier that maintains the central finite curve. The destruction of this barrier has catastrophic effects. The Citadel, which exists at a nexus point in dimensional space, begins falling apart. Rick's and Morty's at the Citadel try to escape as the structure collapses. Many are killed as the Citadel breaks into pieces and falls through dimensional rifts. Rick, C-137, and Morty witness this destruction. They realize what evil Morty is doing and understand the implications. If the central finite curve is destroyed, all the dimensions inside it will be exposed to the larger multiverse. The barrier that protected these Rick-dominated universes will be gone. Rick tries to stop evil Morty, yet he's too late. The rift cannon completes its work and tears open the barrier. Evil Morty escapes through the rift into the multiverse beyond the central finite curve. He's achieved his goal of leaving the Rick-dominated section of reality. The episode shows evil Morty traveling through strange dimensions that look completely different from anything shown before. These are universes where the rules are different and where Rick's intelligence doesn't make him special. Evil Morty has freed himself from the system that defined his existence. The destruction of the central finite curve has enormous consequences. The Citadel is completely destroyed, killing thousands of Ricks and Mortys. The organized society that Ricks built to govern themselves is gone. The barrier that kept certain dimensions separate from the rest of the multiverse is breached. Dimensions that were inside the curve are now accessible to beings from outside the curve. The show's entire cosmology has changed fundamentally. Rick, C-137, is left dealing with the aftermath of evil Morty's escape. The episode reveals more about Rick's past through flashbacks that appear throughout the episode. These flashbacks show Rick at different points in his life, apparently confirming that the origin story from the Rick Shank Rickdemption was at least partially true. Rick did have a wife named Diane and a daughter named Beth who were killed. Rick did spend years hunting for the Rick who killed them. The flashbacks show Rick eventually finding the Rick responsible for his family's death. Rick confronts this other Rick and learns that this Rick is part of a larger group of Ricks who are building the central finite curve. They invite Rick to join them. Initially, Rick refuses because he's only interested in revenge. However, after killing or confronting the Rick who murdered his family, Rick is left empty and without purpose. Rick eventually decides to join the other Ricks in creating the central finite curve. He helps build the barrier and trap himself inside it. This is presented as Rick giving up on the larger multiverse and accepting a smaller existence where he's guaranteed to be important. Rick chose to imprison himself in a section of reality where his genius would always matter, rather than face the possibility of being insignificant in the infinite multiverse. These revelations make evil Morty's escape more meaningful. Evil Morty understood what Rick did and rejected it completely. He saw the central finite curve as a cage built by Rick's narcissism. He recognized that every Morty inside the curve exists only to serve Ricks and make them feel superior. Evil Morty refused to accept this role and was willing to destroy everything to break free from it. The episode also explores the relationship between Rick C-137 and Morty in new ways. Morty learns about Rick's past and about the central finite curve. He understands for the first time why Rick acts the way he does and what drives Rick's behavior. This knowledge changes how Morty sees Rick. Rick becomes less mysterious and more comprehensible, yet also more tragic and more selfish. Rick's choice to help create the central finite curve reveals something important about his character. Rick talks constantly about how nothing matters, and how infinite possibilities mean that individual choices are meaningless. Yet Rick chose to limit himself to universes where he's the smartest person. He couldn't handle the psychological challenge of existing in universes where he might not be special. His philosophy of meaninglessness is contradicted by his desperate need to be important. The episode ends with Rick and Morty returning home. The Citadel is destroyed. Evil Morty has escaped to the larger multiverse, and the central finite curve is broken. Rick seems defeated and tired. He's lost the structure that gave his existence meaning. The society of Ricks is gone. The barrier that protected his ego is destroyed. Rick is now just one genius in an infinite multiverse where countless beings are smarter, more powerful, or more significant than he is. Evil Morty's arc represents a critique of Rick's entire worldview. Evil Morty is a Morty who saw through Rick's philosophy and rejected it. He recognized that Rick's claims about nothing mattering are actually Rick's way of protecting himself from caring about things. Evil Morty understood that the multiverse Rick describes is actually a limited section of reality that Rick chose because it made him feel important. Evil Morty escaped this limited reality by being willing to do things that Rick couldn't do. The complexity of Rick variants versus Morty variants is explored through how different they can actually be. Most Ricks follow similar patterns. They're genius scientists who invent portal technology, who have troubled relationships with their families, and who deal with existential questions in similar ways. The Council of Ricks exists because Ricks are similar enough to work together and recognize common interests. Even Rick C-137, who rejects the Council, is still fundamentally similar to other Ricks. Mortys, however, show more variation in potential than Ricks do. Most Mortys are anxious and not particularly intelligent, yet Evil Morty demonstrates that a Morty can become something completely different. Evil Morty is intelligent, ruthless, strategic, and capable of long-term planning. He doesn't fit the pattern of what Mortys are supposed to be. This suggests that Mortys have potential that the Rick-dominated system suppresses. The episode implies that the relationship between Ricks and Mortys exists to keep Mortys subordinate. Ricks need Mortys for practical reasons like camouflaging their brainwaves. They also need Mortys psychologically, as people they can feel superior to. A Morty who becomes too intelligent or too independent threatens this dynamic. Evil Morty became that threat by refusing to accept his designated role in Rick's universe. The destruction of the Citadel means that organized Rick society no longer exists. There's no council to govern Ricks or assign Mortys to Ricks who need them. The system that maintained the Rick-Morty hierarchy has collapsed. Individual Ricks and Mortys are now on their own, in a multiverse where the old rules no longer apply. This creates uncertainty about what happens next. The episode raises questions about whether Rick C-137 is actually the Rickest Rick, as he's been called. The Rickest Rick would presumably be the Rick who best embodies what it means to be Rick. Yet Rick C-137's involvement in creating the central finite curve suggests he's insecure and afraid like other Ricks. He needed the artificial boundary to guarantee his importance. He couldn't face the infinite multiverse without that protection. Evil Morty's escape to the larger multiverse opens narrative possibilities for future episodes. The multiverse beyond the central finite curve is unexplored territory where completely different kinds of stories can be told. Universes might exist where the rules of physics are different, where intelligence means something else, or where Rick's entire approach to existence is irrelevant. Evil Morty is out there somewhere, having adventures in this larger reality. The relationship between Rick and Morty is fundamentally changed by these revelations. Morty now knows that Rick helped create a system designed to keep Morty's subordinate. Morty understands that the adventures they've been on were always constrained by Rick's need to be the smartest person around. Morty sees Rick as less of a genius and more as someone who built himself a comfortable cage and then pretended it was the entire universe. Rick's reaction to losing the Citadel and the central finite curve shows vulnerability that he usually hides. Rick built his identity around being smarter than everyone else. The central finite curve guaranteed this would be true. Now that the curve is broken, Rick has to face the possibility that he's not as special as he believed. There are infinite beings in the larger multiverse who might be superior to Rick in every way that matters to him. The episode suggests that Evil Morty might be the only character in the show who has genuinely freed himself from the patterns that trap everyone else. Rick is trapped by his need to be important. Morty is trapped by his relationship with Rick. Jerry is trapped by his inadequacy. Beth is trapped by her father issues. Evil Morty recognized his trap and escaped it, even though doing so required destroying everything around him. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. While Evil Morty tore down the structures that defined Rick's universe, the family Rick claimed to protect was developing their own complexities and starting to question whether they wanted to keep living in Rick's shadow. Section 8. Summer and Beth's growth. Summer Smith begins the series as a relatively simple character. She's a teenage girl concerned with typical teenage problems like popularity, boys, and fitting in at school. Her role in early episodes is minimal. She's excluded from Rick and Morty's adventures and seems to exist mainly as background for the family dynamics. However, as the series progresses, Summer develops into a much more significant character with her own agency, capabilities, and emotional complexity. Summer's transformation begins gradually in Season 2. She starts joining Rick and Morty on adventures more frequently. The episode Raising Gazorpazorp from Season 1 shows an early example of Summer being included. In this episode, Morty gets an alien creature pregnant and has to deal with the baby. Summer goes with Rick to the alien planet Gazorpazorp, where the alien baby species comes from. This planet has a society where females rule, and males are considered violent and stupid. Summer witnesses this society and discusses gender roles with the female Gazorpazorpians. The episode shows Summer engaging with ideas about gender and society in ways that reveal she's more thoughtful than she initially appeared. She's not just a shallow teenager. She's capable of understanding complex social structures and thinking critically about them. This episode plants seeds for Summer becoming a more developed character. Season 2's Big Trouble in Little Sanchez features Summer in a significant subplot. Rick transfers his consciousness into a younger clone body to go undercover at Summer and Morty's high school. This younger Rick, called Tiny Rick, becomes popular at school, and Summer sees him fitting in easily. The episode explores Summer's desire for her family to be normal and her frustration when Rick's chaos disrupts that normalcy. Summer recognizes that Tiny Rick is actually Rick's consciousness trapped, and that the young body is consuming Rick's identity. Summer is the one who realizes something is wrong and takes action to save Rick. She works with Morty to extract Rick's consciousness from the young clone before it's too late. This episode shows Summer being perceptive and capable. She understands Rick well enough to see through his behavior and recognize when he's in danger. She's willing to take action, even when it means confronting Rick directly. Season 3's Rickmancing the Stone focuses heavily on Summer's emotional state after her parents' separation. Beth and Jerry divorce at the beginning of Season 3, which affects Summer deeply. She's angry and hurt by the divorce. She doesn't want to deal with her emotions, so she asks Rick to take her on adventures as an escape. Rick agrees because having Summer around is convenient for his purposes. The episode shows Summer, Rick, and Morty in a post-apocalyptic dimension where they're scavenging and fighting. Summer becomes involved with a man named Himridge who lives in this apocalyptic world. She develops feelings for him quickly and considers staying in this dimension permanently. This represents Summer wanting to escape from her normal life and from the pain of her parents' divorce. Summer gets physically modified in this dimension. She receives muscular enhancements that make her much stronger. These modifications change how she looks and how she carries herself. Summer becomes a capable fighter who can hold her own in dangerous situations. She's no longer someone who needs protection. She can protect herself and others. This physical transformation represents her emotional transformation from dependent teenager to independent person. The episode explores how Summer deals with pain differently than Morty does. Morty tends to process his emotions through anxiety and fear. Summer processes her emotions through anger and action. When she's hurt by her parents' divorce, she responds by throwing herself into dangerous adventures and by modifying her body. She's trying to become someone new who doesn't have to feel the pain of being the old Summer. Eventually, Summer realizes she can't stay in the post-apocalyptic dimension forever. She has to return to her real life and deal with her parents' divorce. Rick removes the physical modifications and Summer returns to her normal appearance. However, the experience has changed her. She's proven to herself that she can be strong and capable. She knows she can survive difficult situations. Season 3's The ABCs of Beth explores Beth's character in depth, while also showing how Summer relates to her mother. Beth is offered the opportunity to visit a fantasy world that Rick created for her when she was a child. In this world, Beth's childhood toys and imaginary friends are real. Beth reconnects with this world and realizes that she abandoned it and the creatures she created there. The episode reveals that Beth was a disturbing child who created a character called Fruipyland, specifically to have a place where she could be violent without consequences. Beth's childhood games involved hurting the creatures in Fruipyland. As an adult, Beth is confronted with the consequences of her childhood behavior. The creatures she abandoned have suffered, and some have become twisted by their isolation. Beth realizes that she might be more like her father Rick than she wants to admit. She's capable of cruelty and of abandoning things she's responsible for. This realization forces Beth to question her identity and her choices. She wonders whether she made the right decision to stay on Earth and raise a family, or whether she should have gone on adventures with Rick when she was younger. Rick offers Beth a solution to her identity crisis. He can make a clone of Beth that would live her life for her, while the real Beth goes on adventures across the multiverse. Beth could experience the life she gave up without abandoning her family, because the clone would take her place. No one would know the difference between Beth and her clone. The clone would be identical and would have all of Beth's memories. The episode ends ambiguously. Beth makes a choice, yet the show doesn't reveal which choice she made. Did Beth choose to go on adventures and leave a clone behind? Or did Beth choose to stay with her family and reject the clone option? The episode suggests that even Beth herself might not know for certain which version of herself she is. This creates ongoing uncertainty about Beth's identity. This identity question affects how Summer and Morty see their mother. They know that Rick offered Beth the clone option. They don't know which choice Beth made. This means they can't be certain whether the Beth they're living with is their actual mother or a clone created to replace her. This uncertainty creates distance in their relationships with Beth, even though Beth continues acting like their mother. Season 4's The Old Man in the Seat features a subplot about Beth and Summer bonding. Beth has started going on solo adventures without Rick, trying to prove her independence and capability. Summer wants to join her mother on these adventures. Beth initially resists because she sees these adventures as her way of establishing her own identity, separate from her family and from Rick. Summer persists and eventually joins Beth on an adventure. They work together to complete a mission and they fight side by side against threats. The experience brings them closer together. Beth sees that Summer is genuinely capable and can contribute meaningfully to adventures. Summer sees her mother as someone independent and competent, rather than just as her parent. This episode establishes that Beth has been going on solo adventures regularly. She's developed her own reputation in some parts of the galaxy. She's not just Rick's daughter or Jerry's ex-wife. She's Beth Smith, an adventurer and fighter in her own right. This represents significant growth from the horse surgeon who lived in suburban mediocrity in Season 1. Season 5 explores Beth's relationship with her alternate self from the Croninberg dimension. The show reveals that Beth and Jerry from the Croninberg dimension, the dimension Rick and Morty abandoned in Season 1, have been traveling the multiverse together. They've become capable fighters and adventurers who survive in the monster-filled world Rick left them in. This Croninberg Beth eventually encounters regular Beth, and they form a connection. The two Beths represent different versions of what Beth could have become. Regular Beth chose to stay with her family and maintain some version of normal life. Croninberg Beth was forced to adapt to impossible circumstances and became something entirely different. Meeting each other allows both Beths to see the road not taken and to understand themselves better through comparison. Summer's growth throughout the series shows her becoming more confident and self-assured. She starts as someone who desperately wants to be popular and accepted. She develops into someone who knows her own capabilities and doesn't need external validation. She learns that she can handle herself in dangerous situations. She discovers that she's smarter and more competent than she initially believed. Summer's relationship with Rick also evolves. In early seasons, Rick barely pays attention to Summer. He sees her as irrelevant to his adventures with Morty. As Summer proves herself capable, Rick starts treating her with more respect. He includes her in plans. He trusts her to handle important tasks. He acknowledges that she's useful. This shift shows that Rick is capable of recognizing competence, even when it comes from someone he initially dismissed. The contrast between how Beth and Summer develop is important for understanding their characters. Beth's development is about discovering identity and questioning choices she made years ago. She's dealing with regret about roads not taken and wondering whether she wasted her potential by choosing conventional life. Summer's development is about discovering capabilities she didn't know she had and growing into adulthood with more confidence than most teenagers possess. Beth's relationships with both her children become more complex as the series progresses. She sees Morty being damaged by his adventures with Rick, yet she allows it to continue because she wants Rick's approval. She sees Summer becoming independent and capable, which Beth supports even though it means Summer needs her less. Beth is torn between being a protective mother and being someone who values the kind of strength and independence that comes from facing danger. The question of whether Beth is a clone continues affecting her character throughout seasons 4 and 5. Beth herself seems uncertain about her own identity. She makes comments suggesting she's questioned whether she's real or a replacement. This existential uncertainty influences her decisions and her relationships. If she might be a clone, what does that mean for her choices and her family? Summer's choice to get muscular enhancements in the post-apocalyptic dimension represents her willingness to change herself fundamentally. She didn't just want to be stronger emotionally, she wanted to physically transform into someone new. Even though Rick removed the enhancements, the experience showed Summer that identity is flexible. She can choose to be different versions of herself depending on circumstances. Beth's childhood creation of Fruipyland and her violent games there reveal darkness in her character that explains some of her adult behavior. Beth has always been capable of cruelty and of compartmentalizing that cruelty. She's Rick's daughter in ways that go beyond genetics. She has his capacity for emotional detachment and his willingness to hurt others when it serves her purposes. The relationship between Summer and Morty also develops throughout the series. They start as typical siblings who don't particularly like each other. Summer sees Morty as a loser, and Morty sees Summer as a mean, popular girl. As they share more experiences, they develop mutual respect. They recognize that they're both dealing with the same difficult family situation, and that they need to support each other. Summer becomes protective of Morty in later seasons. She sees how Rick treats Morty, and how adventures damage Morty psychologically. She intervenes on Morty's behalf occasionally, standing up to Rick when Morty can't. This protective instinct shows Summer maturing and developing empathy for her brother's situation. She understands that Morty needs someone looking out for him. Beth's decision to divorce Jerry represents her choosing independence over security. Jerry provided stability and conventional family structure. Beth gave that up to pursue something else, though she's not entirely clear on what that something else is. The divorce frees Beth to explore her identity, yet also leaves her uncertain about who she wants to be. The growth of both Summer and Beth shows that they're not just supporting characters in Rick and Morty's story. They have their own arcs, their own development, and their own agency. The show dedicates episodes to exploring their perspectives and their emotional journeys. They make choices that affect the family's dynamics and the direction of the story. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Summer and Beth had each carved out their own identities, separate from Rick's shadow. Discoveries that would prove crucial as Morty himself began accumulating the psychological weight of years spent traveling through infinite realities with a grandfather who treated trauma as just another adventure. Section 9. Character Consequences and Morty Evolution. Morty Smith begins the series as a 14-year-old boy with anxiety problems, poor grades, and very little confidence. He's easily frightened, struggles to make decisions, and depends heavily on others to guide him. The first episode shows Morty being dragged out of bed in the middle of the night by Rick, barely able to understand what's happening, and terrified throughout the entire adventure. This scared, incompetent Morty is the baseline from which his character develops over the course of the series. The pilot episode establishes Morty's main characteristics in clear detail. He stutters when he talks, expressing his thoughts in fragmented sentences that trail off or restart multiple times. He's afraid of almost everything that happens during adventures. He questions Rick's decisions, yet lacks the confidence to actually refuse or resist. His parents argue about whether Morty should be allowed to go on adventures with Rick, yet Morty himself doesn't have much say in the matter. When the Mega Seeds give him temporary intelligence, he becomes articulate and confident, showing that Morty's limitations are not permanent features of who he is. The temporary nature of this confidence reveals that Morty has potential that circumstances normally suppress. Early Season 1 episodes continue showing Morty as incompetent and fearful in consistent ways. In Lawnmower Dog, Morty goes along with Rick's plan to enter his math teacher's dreams, even though he's uncomfortable with it. Morty expresses concerns about the plan, yet follows Rick's instructions anyway, because he doesn't know how to say no effectively. His role in these early adventures is mostly to follow Rick's instructions, ask questions about what's happening, and react with fear when things go wrong. He's essentially a passive participant who Rick brings along for practical reasons, rather than because Morty contributes meaningfully to solving problems or making decisions. Rick Potion number 9 marks the first major trauma that begins changing Morty in fundamental ways. This episode forces Morty to bury his own corpse after he and Rick abandon their original dimension. Morty sits in the backyard afterward, processing what just happened to him. He looks down at the dirt where he buried himself. His hands are dirty from digging. He's physically shaking from the experience. The episode doesn't show Morty talking about what happened or processing it verbally. Instead, it shows him sitting in silence, dealing with the psychological impact of seeing his own dead body and knowing that he left an entire dimension behind. He's learned that he's replaceable, that his life is contingent, and that Rick is willing to abandon entire realities rather than fix problems. This experience plants seeds of Morty understanding the true nature of his relationship with Rick and the multiverse. The burial scene becomes a reference point that the show returns to occasionally, reminding viewers and Morty himself of this foundational trauma. Season 1's finale, Rixie Business, shows Morty gaining some assertiveness in his interactions with Rick. When Rick throws a party that gets out of control, Morty eventually stands up to Rick and demands that Rick fix the situation. Morty raises his voice at Rick, something he rarely did in earlier episodes. Morty's anger at Rick feels justified, and his willingness to express that anger represents growth from the terrified boy who couldn't question Rick's decisions. The episode shows Morty taking some ownership over what happens in his house and his life, even though Rick ultimately controls most situations. Season 2 shows Morty becoming gradually more competent while also accumulating more trauma from continued adventures. A Rickle in Time deals directly with the psychological aftermath of the Croninberg dimension abandonment. Morty is having difficulty processing what happened to him. He's uncertain about his own reality and his own choices. The episode shows reality splitting into multiple timelines, where different versions of Morty make different choices. One version of Morty becomes increasingly detached and numb, representing how trauma is affecting his emotional state. The episode explores how Morty's psychology is fragmenting under the weight of his experiences with Rick. Morty Night Run from Season 2 features Morty making moral choices that contradict Rick's wishes directly. Morty saves an alien named Fart, who Rick wanted to deliver to assassins for money. Morty believes that all life is valuable and that Fart deserves to live. He goes against Rick's explicit instructions to rescue Fart from the assassins who want to kill him. This episode shows Morty developing his own moral framework, separate from Rick's nihilistic worldview. Morty cares about things, even when Rick insists nothing matters. However, Morty Night Run also teaches Morty a harsh lesson about the complexity of moral choices. Fart reveals that his species plans to eliminate all carbon-based life because they consider it inferior. Morty is forced to kill Fart himself to prevent this genocide from happening. Morty has to shoot and kill the being he just rescued, learning that his moral instincts can lead to terrible outcomes and that sometimes there are no good choices available. The episode ends with Morty visibly shaken by what he had to do. The Ricks Must Be Crazy shows Morty becoming more knowledgeable about science and technology through exposure. He engages in conversations about physics and energy with Rick and with the scientist Zeep Zanflorp. Morty asks informed questions and understands concepts that would have been completely beyond him in Season 1. He still doesn't understand everything, yet he understands more than he did before. He's learned through exposure to Rick's work and through repeatedly encountering advanced technology. Morty's education has been happening through experience rather than through formal schooling. Season 2's Look Who's Purging Now demonstrates Morty's capacity for violence when pushed too far emotionally. On a planet where an annual purge allows legal murder for one day, Morty initially tries to avoid violence and wants to leave the planet immediately. However, after witnessing injustice and cruelty toward innocent people, Morty snaps and goes on a killing spree. He picks up weapons and starts shooting people. He murders numerous people with apparent enjoyment, laughing and seeming to take pleasure in the violence. This episode reveals that Morty has darkness inside him that can emerge under certain conditions. The sweet, anxious boy who started the series is capable of extreme violence when triggered by witnessing enough cruelty or feeling enough anger. The Wedding Squanchers at the end of Season 2 shows Morty's loyalty to Rick despite everything that's happened between them. When Rick is taken by the Galactic Federation, Morty is genuinely upset about losing his grandfather. He wants to help Rick, even though Rick has traumatized him repeatedly throughout 2 seasons. Morty's attachment to Rick is complicated and contradictory. He recognizes that Rick treats him badly and manipulates him. He knows that adventures with Rick are dangerous and damaging to his psychology. Yet, he still cares about Rick and values their relationship in ways that don't make logical sense given the harm Rick has caused. Season 3 opens with the Rickshank Rickdemption, where Morty actively helps Rick escape from prison and collapse the Galactic Federation government. Morty is capable enough to operate Rick's portal gun without supervision, something he couldn't have done in Season 1. He navigates dangerous situations and contributes meaningfully to Rick's plan. His competence has increased significantly from Season 1, when he could barely understand what was happening during adventures. However, Season 3 also shows the emotional cost of Morty's adventures accumulating in visible ways. The Whirly-Durly Conspiracy features Jerry and Morty going on an adventure without Rick present. Morty has become desensitized to violence and danger in ways that shock Jerry. He handles situations that would have terrified Season 1 Morty with casual efficiency. Jerry is horrified by how comfortable Morty has become with death and chaos. Jerry sees his son behaving like someone much older and more damaged than a 14-year-old should be. Rest and Ricklaxation from Season 3 explores Morty's psychological state explicitly through a device Rick builds. Rick creates a machine that removes negative emotions and personality traits from people who use it. When Morty uses this machine, it separates his anxiety, self-doubt, and attachment to Jessica from his personality. The detoxified Morty is confident, successful, and emotionally healthy. He achieves things easily and seems genuinely happy. Yet, this detoxified Morty is also cold and willing to hurt people to get what he wants. The toxic version of Morty contains all his negative traits and is needy, anxious, and desperate for approval. The episode shows that Morty's positive qualities like empathy and caution are mixed together with his negative qualities like fear and insecurity. You can't remove Morty's weaknesses without also removing aspects of his humanity. Season 4's The Old Man and the Seat shows Morty in a relatively stable relationship with a girl from his school. Morty has achieved something he desperately wanted in early seasons, when he could barely talk to Jessica. He has a girlfriend who actually likes him and wants to spend time with him. However, the relationship is complicated by Morty's adventures with Rick. Morty can't be fully present in the relationship because part of him is always ready to go on another adventure. His girlfriend doesn't understand why Morty sometimes seems distant or distracted by things he can't explain to her. The Vat of Acid episode from Season 4 is crucial for understanding Morty's development and his relationship with Rick. Rick builds what he claims is a device that allows Morty to create save points in his life like a video game. Morty can do anything he wants and then return to a saved point where none of it happened. Morty uses this device to live recklessly, knowing he can undo any consequences. He acts without fear because he believes nothing is permanent. Morty meets a girl during one of these save point periods and falls in love with her. He has genuine experiences with her and develops real feelings. They spend time together and form a meaningful connection. However, when Morty needs to use the save point device to fix a problem, all of those experiences are undone. The girl doesn't remember him. Their entire relationship never happened from her perspective. Morty is devastated because he lost something real and meaningful. Then Rick reveals the truth that makes everything worse. There was no save point device. Rick was actually moving Morty between different dimensions that were nearly identical to each other. Every time Morty used what he thought was a save point, Rick was actually abandoning that dimension and moving Morty to a new one. The girl Morty loved died in the original dimension when Morty abandoned it. This episode represents one of Rick's cruelest manipulations of Morty, because Rick allowed Morty to believe his actions had no consequences, then revealed that every action had permanent and devastating consequences. Season 5 shows Morty becoming increasingly frustrated with Rick and with the entire pattern of going on adventures. Mort Dinner Rick Andre features Morty trying to have a normal dinner date with Jessica. He wants to do something that regular teenagers do. Rick's involvement keeps disrupting the date with multiverse complications that Morty has to deal with. Morty's desire for normalcy conflicts with the chaotic reality of being connected to Rick and being known across multiple dimensions. The Season 5 finale, Rick Mirai Jack, forces Morty to confront truths about his relationship with Rick and about the multiverse structure. Morty learns about the central finite curve and realizes that every adventure has happened within an artificial boundary that Rick helped create. Morty understands that Rick has been controlling aspects of reality that Morty didn't even know were controllable. The infinite possibilities Morty thought existed were actually limited possibilities within Rick's constructed cage. Throughout these developments, several patterns emerge in Morty's evolution as a character. First, Morty becomes more competent through repeated exposure to danger and advanced technology. Second, Morty accumulates trauma that affects his psychology in lasting ways. Third, Morty develops his own moral framework, despite Rick's constant influence pushing him toward nihilism. Fourth, Morty's relationship with Rick becomes increasingly complicated and contradictory. Fifth, Morty's desire for normal life conflicts directly with his adventure life in ways that become more pronounced over time. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Morty's transformation from passive follower to capable partner happened within a multiverse structure that was itself more complex and deliberately constructed than anyone watching the show initially understood, raising questions about whether any choice made within Rick's universe could ever truly matter. Section 10. Timeline and Multiverse Lore. The multiverse structure in Rick and Morty is fundamental to understanding how the show's universe works and what limitations or rules govern the infinite possibilities that Rick claims exist. The show reveals information about the multiverse gradually across seasons, with major revelations changing how viewers understand the basic cosmology of the show's reality. The multiverse is not simply infinite possibilities without structure. It's a complex system with rules, boundaries, and organizational principles that become increasingly important to the show's mythology. The basic concept of the multiverse is introduced in the pilot episode when Rick uses his portal gun to travel to another dimension. The portal gun is Rick's most important invention. It allows instant travel to any location in any dimension. The portal gun creates bright green oval portals that appear in the air. Stepping through a portal instantly transports someone to wherever the portal is programmed to go. The technology seems simple when watching the show, yet portal travel is actually incredibly complex. Portal technology works by accessing something called the multiverse, or the infinite possible dimensions. The show establishes that every possible variation of reality exists somewhere in the multiverse. There are dimensions where small details are different, like everyone's chairs are slightly taller. There are dimensions where major historical events happen differently. There are dimensions with completely different physical laws and alien species. The possibilities are truly infinite. Early episodes use the multiverse primarily as a storytelling device. Rick and Morty can visit any location or type of world because infinite dimensions mean that any concept exists somewhere. The show can do a Mad Max post-apocalyptic episode, then do an alien planet episode, then do a dimension where everyone is a different species. The multiverse provides unlimited setting options. Rick Potion number 9 is the first episode to establish that the multiverse has practical limitations despite being infinite. Rick explains that he can only move to a replacement dimension a few times before running out of dimensions that meet his specific criteria. Rick needs a dimension where the love potion problem was solved, yet where that dimension's Rick and Morty died immediately afterward. This very specific combination exists in multiple dimensions, yet not in infinite dimensions. The multiverse contains infinite possibilities, yet not infinite copies of every specific situation. This concept is important because it establishes that even in an infinite multiverse, practical limitations exist. Rick can't endlessly jump between dimensions escaping consequences because eventually he'll run out of suitable dimensions to jump to. This means that Rick's dimension hopping has limits, and that consequences can catch up to him eventually. Close Rick Counters of the Rick kind introduces the Citadel of Ricks, which reveals that Ricks across dimensions have organized themselves into a society. The Council of Ricks has created government structures that span multiple dimensions. They can track portal gun signatures across dimensions, which means portal travel leaves traces that can be detected and followed. The technology that seems to provide unlimited freedom actually creates trackable patterns. The Citadel episode also establishes that while infinite Ricks exist, most Ricks follow similar patterns. They're genius scientists who invent portal technology and have troubled relationships with their families. The Council exists because Ricks recognize their similarities and decide to work together. This suggests that even across infinite possibilities, certain patterns repeat consistently enough to create recognizable types. Season 2's The Ricks Must Be Crazy explores the concept of nested universes. Rick has created a miniature universe inside a battery that powers his car. Inside this miniature universe, intelligent life evolved. One of those intelligent beings, Zeep Zanflorp, created his own miniature universe to power his technology. The episode shows that universes can exist within universes recursively. Reality has layers, and beings in one layer might not be aware of the larger reality surrounding them. This concept raises philosophical questions about whether Rick's universe is itself inside someone else's battery or experiment. Rick dismisses this possibility, yet the episode demonstrates that beings within a created universe can't necessarily detect that they're created. The multiverse might be more complex than Rick understands or admits. Total Recall from Season 2 deals with parasites that manipulate memory and create false realities. The episode shows how easy it is to create convincing false memories and how difficult it is to distinguish real experiences from implanted ones. This connects to multiverse questions because if memories can be false, how do characters know which dimension they're actually in? How do they know their experiences are real? Season 3's The Rick Shank Rickdemption reveals information about Rick's past that connects to how the multiverse functions. The episode shows that many Ricks work together to create the central finite curve. This curve is a barrier that isolates certain dimensions from all other dimensions. The central finite curve only includes dimensions where Rick is the smartest person in the universe. Everything that happens in Rick and Morty occurs within this artificial boundary. The central finite curve is the most important revelation about multiverse structure in the entire series. The infinite possibilities that the show presents are actually finite possibilities within a boundary that Rick and other Ricks created. They built this boundary deliberately to wall themselves off from dimensions where they might not be special. The curve protects Rick's ego by guaranteeing he'll always be the smartest person around. This revelation recontextualizes everything about the show. Every adventure happened inside the central finite curve. Every dimension Rick visited was one where Rick was guaranteed to be extraordinary. The show's entire premise of infinite possibilities was actually limited possibilities within an artificial construct. True infinity exists outside the curve, in sections of the multiverse that Rick has cut himself off from. The central finite curve explains several things about the show's cosmology. It explains why Ricks across dimensions are similar enough to form the Citadel. They're all within the curve, meaning they all exist in dimensions with the same basic parameter. It explains why Rick can predict how things will go in different dimensions. The dimensions within the curve follow predictable patterns because they share fundamental characteristics. The curve also explains the relationship between Ricks and Mortys. Within the curve, every dimension has a Rick who is the smartest person. Most dimensions also have Mortys who are Rick's grandsons. This consistency exists because the curve specifically includes these types of dimensions. Outside the curve, dimensions might exist where Rick is ordinary, or where Rick doesn't exist at all. The Ricklantis mix-up shows how the Citadel functions as a society within the central finite curve. The Citadel exists outside normal dimensional space as a kind of hub where Ricks from different dimensions gather. The Citadel has developed complex social structures, economic systems, and political institutions. It's a functioning civilization built by and for Ricks who recognize their common interests. The episode demonstrates that the multiverse is not just infinite dimensions existing independently. It's an organized space where beings travel between dimensions, trade across dimensional boundaries, and create institutions that span multiple realities. The multiverse has infrastructure. Portal technology creates networks of connected dimensions that function almost like countries or cities connected by roads. Season 4 explores variations in how dimensions work. Never Ricking Morty is a meta episode that takes place on a train traveling through narratives rather than through space. The episode suggests that stories themselves might be dimensions or spaces that can be traveled through. This expands the concept of what a dimension can be beyond just alternative physical realities. The Vat of Acid episode reveals that Rick can identify dimensions that are nearly identical to each other down to incredibly small details. Rick moves Morty between dimensions that are so similar that no one can tell the difference. This ability to find nearly identical dimensions demonstrates how precisely Rick can search the multiverse for specific parameters. Portal technology isn't just random dimension hopping. It's targeted selection from infinite options. Season 5's Mort Dinner Rick Andre shows time manipulation connecting to dimensional travel. Rick can travel to dimensions where time moves at different speeds relative to his home dimension. He uses this to accomplish tasks that would take centuries, yet only take hours from his perspective. Time and space and dimension are all connected aspects of multiverse travel that Rick can manipulate. Rick Mirai Jack in Season 5 shows the destruction of the central finite curve. Evil Morty builds a weapon that tears apart the barrier separating curved dimensions from the larger multiverse. This destruction has catastrophic effects. The Citadel, which existed at a nexus point between dimensions, falls apart completely. The organized society of Ricks collapses. The boundary that defined which dimensions were accessible is breached. The destruction of the curve means that Rick C-137 and other Ricks can now access dimensions outside the curve. They can travel to universes where Rick isn't the smartest person, or where Rick doesn't exist at all. However, beings from outside the curve can also now access the previously protected dimensions. The barrier worked both ways, keeping outside beings out just as it kept Ricks in. The episode reveals that the larger multiverse beyond the central finite curve is vastly more diverse and strange than anything shown inside the curve. Evil Morty travels through dimensions that look completely unlike normal reality. These are universes where the fundamental rules might be different. The multiverse outside the curve is truly infinite in ways that the curve-limited multiverse was not. This raises questions about what happens next in the show's continuity. Can Rick continue operating in the same way now that the curve is destroyed? Will beings from outside the curve become new threats? Will Rick explore the larger multiverse? The show hasn't fully answered these questions yet because seasons after the curve's destruction are still being produced. The multiverse structure also includes elements like the Galactic Federation, which governs across multiple dimensions. The Federation has laws and authority that span dimensional boundaries. They can travel between dimensions and coordinate activities across their territory. This shows that political and social structures can exist across the multiverse rather than being limited to single dimensions. Portal travel itself has rules and limitations that become clear through various episodes. Portal guns require power sources. They can malfunction or be damaged. They leave signatures that can be tracked by those with the right technology. Portal travel isn't perfectly safe. Characters can get lost between dimensions or trapped in dimensional rifts. The technology is powerful, yet not without risks. The show also establishes that some dimensions are harder to access than others. Certain dimensions are blocked or protected by various means. Some dimensions are inherently dangerous because of their physical properties. The multiverse isn't uniformly accessible. Some parts are easier to reach and safer to visit than others. The concept of dimensional coordinates exists within the show's cosmology. Rick's dimension is labeled C-137, suggesting that dimensions have numerical or coded designations. The Citadel can track which Rick comes from which dimension. This organizational system allows navigation through the multiverse and communication about specific dimensions. Different types of dimensions are shown throughout the series. There are dimensions with advanced technology, primitive technology, or no technology. There are dimensions dominated by different species. There are dimensions where abstract concepts become physical reality. The variety of dimensional types demonstrates the scope of possibilities within the multiverse structure. The multiverse also includes pocket dimensions and artificial spaces. Rick creates small dimensions for specific purposes. He's built the miniature universe that powers his car. He's created Fruipyland for Beth. These artificial spaces exist within the larger multiverse structure. They're not natural dimensions that emerged on their own, yet they function as real spaces that can be accessed and inhabited. Timeline variations are part of multiverse structure. Different dimensions have different timelines where history unfolded differently. Some dimensions split from others at specific historical moments. This creates branching possibilities where dimensions are identical up to certain points and then diverge. Rick can identify when dimensions branched from each other by analyzing their histories. The show suggests, through various episodes, that consciousness, or identity, might not be tied to specific dimensions. Rick can transfer his consciousness between bodies across dimensions. The same person can exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions. This raises questions about what makes someone an individual if multiple versions of them exist and can potentially interact with each other. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The multiverse's structure revealed that Rick's infinite possibilities were actually a finite cage he helped build. Yet understanding the cosmology of reality couldn't answer the more immediate question of where the show's story currently stands, and where it might go from here. Section 11. Recent Seasons and Current State. After the destruction of the central finite curve in Season 5's finale, Rick and Morty entered a new phase that continues to unfold as the show produces new seasons. Season 6 premiered in September 2022, and the show has been renewed through Season 10, guaranteeing that Rick and Morty will continue for several more years. Understanding where the show currently stands requires looking at how recent seasons have handled the aftermath of major revelations, and how the show has evolved its storytelling approach. Season 6 begins with Rick and Morty returning to relatively normal adventures after the events of Season 5. The premiere episode, Citadel of Ricks, deals directly with the consequences of the central finite curve's destruction. The portal gun stops working properly because the curve that defined dimensional coordinates no longer exists in the same way. Rick has to rebuild the portal gun to work with the new multiverse structure. The episode shows Rick, Morty, Jerry, and Beth all being scattered across dimensions and having to find their way back to each other. Citadel of Ricks also reveals more about Rick's past. The episode shows that Rick's original dimension, where his wife Diane and daughter Beth were killed, is not the same dimension where the show has been taking place. Rick's backstory from the Rick Shank Rickdemption is confirmed as real. Rick's wife and daughter really were killed by another Rick. Rick really did spend years hunting for the Rick responsible. After that hunt ended, Rick chose to abandon his original dimension and move to a dimension where Beth was alive and where he could have a family again. The Beth we've been watching throughout the show is not the daughter Rick lost. She's a replacement daughter from a different dimension. This revelation adds complexity to Rick's relationship with Beth and with the entire Smith family. Rick chose this specific family from infinite options. He deliberately found a dimension where he could insert himself into a family structure. Rick's actions throughout the series take on different meaning when viewers understand that this family represents Rick's second chance at having what he lost. Rick, a Mort Well Lived from Season 6 shows Rick and Morty inside a die simulation game. They get trapped in a virtual reality and have to fight their way out. The episode explores how Rick approaches simulated realities versus actual reality. Rick treats simulated people as completely expendable, killing them without hesitation. The episode questions whether there's actually a meaningful difference between simulated consciousness and real consciousness. Bethic Twinstinct features regular Beth meeting her alternate self from space. Space Beth is the version of Beth who chose to go on adventures with Rick years ago instead of staying with her family. The two Beths spend time together and develop a close relationship. The episode explores identity and choice through showing how the same person became two very different people based on one decision. Space Beth is confident, accomplished, and independent. Regular Beth is uncertain, conflicted, and tied to her family. The episode doesn't judge either version as better or worse. It simply shows how different choices create different lives. Night Family takes a dark turn by revealing that the Smith family's bodies have been acting independently while they sleep. Their bodies perform tasks and live entire lives during the night that their conscious minds don't remember. The night versions of the family have been functioning as a separate family unit. When the Day family discovers this, conflict emerges between the two versions. The episode explores questions about consciousness, identity, and what makes someone themselves. Final Dismithation parodies the Final Destination movie series by having Jerry marked for death by fortune cookies. Death itself pursues Jerry, trying to kill him in elaborate ways. Rick has to help Jerry survive against an abstract concept given physical form. The episode shows Rick genuinely trying to keep Jerry alive, despite usually having contempt for Jerry. Their relationship has evolved to where Rick will expend significant effort to protect Jerry when necessary. A Rick in King Morcher's Mort features Rick and Morty in a medieval fantasy world. They encounter knights, castles, and swords instead of the usual science fiction elements. The episode demonstrates the show's continued willingness to experiment with different genres and settings. Even in Season 6, the show avoids becoming too formulaic by constantly changing the type of stories it tells. Rictional Mortpoon's Rickmas Mortcation is a Thanksgiving-themed episode where Rick's attempts to make the perfect holiday go wrong in typical Rick and Morty fashion. The episode shows the family trying to have normal holiday experiences while Rick's interventions create chaos. The contrast between wanting normalcy and living with Rick continues to be a source of tension and comedy. Analyze Piss involves Rick being forced to attend therapy. A previous episode had established that Rick goes to therapy occasionally when the family insists on it. This episode explores Rick's psychology through his interactions with a therapist. Rick is resistant and dismissive, treating therapy as a joke. However, the episode suggests that therapy might actually be affecting Rick in ways he doesn't want to admit. The family dynamics are also examined through therapeutic framing. A Rick in King Mortar's Mort shows continued evolution in how Rick treats Morty. Rick involves Morty as a genuine partner rather than just a sidekick. They make decisions together, and Rick listens to Morty's input in ways he didn't in early seasons. The shift in their dynamic reflects how Morty has proven himself capable over multiple seasons of adventures. Season 6's finale, Rictional Mortpoon's Rickmas Mortcation, ends on a note suggesting that more changes are coming to the show's structure. The episode doesn't provide a major cliffhanger like some previous season finales. Instead, it focuses on character relationships and emotional moments. This represents a shift toward the show being more comfortable with emotional storytelling alongside its science fiction concepts. Season 7 premiered in October 2023 and immediately faced a major challenge. Justin Roiland, who voiced both Rick and Morty and was a co-creator of the show, was removed from the show following allegations of misconduct. The show had to recast both main characters with new voice actors. Ian Cardoni took over voicing Rick, and Harry Belden took over voicing Morty. This represented a significant change for a show where Roiland's voice work had been essential to the characters. The recasting was handled with minimal acknowledgement within the show itself. The new voice actors attempted to match Roiland's vocal performances closely. Most viewers adjusted to the new voices relatively quickly. The show continued without major changes to its writing or storytelling approach. This demonstrated that Rick and Morty had become bigger than any single person involved in creating it. Season 7 continues exploring the aftermath of the central finite curve's destruction. Episodes show Rick and Morty encountering beings and dimensions that were previously inaccessible. The multiverse has become genuinely infinite in ways it wasn't before. Rick is no longer guaranteed to be the smartest person in any dimension he visits. This creates new types of conflicts and challenges. How Poopy got his poop back deals with Mr. Poopy Butthole, a minor character who has appeared periodically throughout the series. The episode gives him significant development and explores his life separate from the Smith family. This represents the show's continued willingness to focus on side characters and expand its universe beyond just Rick and Morty's adventures. The Jarek Trap features Jerry and Rick being merged into a single being. This forces them to cooperate and understand each other's perspectives. The episode explores how these two characters, who usually despise each other, might find common ground. It also examines how their conflict affects the rest of the family. Air Force Wong brings back Dr. Wong, the therapist from the Season 3 episode Pickle Rick. Dr. Wong has become a recurring character who provides outside perspective on the family's dysfunction. Her appearances represent moments where the show acknowledges its own patterns and behaviors through therapeutic analysis. That's Amorte involves a dark discovery about a food source that Rick has been using. The episode deals with ethical questions about consumption and ignorance. Rick and the family have to decide whether knowing the truth about something changes whether it's acceptable to continue using it. The episode doesn't provide easy answers. Unmortrican serves as a major event episode that resolves the evil Morty storyline that has been developing since Season 1. Rick C-137 confronts Rick Prime, the Rick who killed Rick C-137's wife and daughter. This confrontation has been building since the show revealed Rick's backstory. The episode provides closure to one of the show's longest-running mysteries, while also showing how much Rick has changed since the series began. Rick's conflict with Rick Prime demonstrates how personal revenge drove Rick's actions for years. Rick built his entire life around hunting this one person. When Rick finally achieves his revenge, he has to figure out what his life means without that driving purpose. The episode explores what happens when you finally get what you've been working toward, and it doesn't provide the satisfaction you expected. Evil Morty returns in this episode as well, having been absent since escaping the central finite curve. His return shows what he's been doing in the larger multiverse. Evil Morty has found relative peace and freedom outside the Rick-dominated section of reality. He wants nothing to do with Rick C-137's revenge quest. This demonstrates that Evil Morty's goal was always escape rather than destruction. Season 7 continues through early 2024 with episodes that maintain the show's mix of science fiction concepts, family dynamics, and emotional storytelling. The show has settled into a pattern where it can tell standalone adventure stories while also advancing long-term character arcs and resolving ongoing mysteries. The current state of Rick and Morty reflects a show that has matured significantly from its early seasons. The show still features crude humor, violence, and nihilistic comedy. However, it also includes genuine character development, emotional moments, and exploration of meaningful themes. Rick himself has changed from the completely detached and invulnerable figure he appeared to be in Season 1. Rick's character arc over 7 seasons shows him slowly becoming more emotionally available and more willing to care about his family. He still maintains his defensive mechanisms and his tendency to treat everything as a joke. However, the mask slips more frequently now. Rick allows himself to be vulnerable in ways he didn't in early seasons. His relationships with Morty, Beth, Summer, and even Jerry have deepened despite Rick's resistance to emotional connection. Morty has grown from a frightened child into a capable young man who can handle himself in dangerous situations. He's accumulated trauma and psychological damage along the way. However, he's also developed confidence, skills, and a stronger sense of self. Morty no longer simply follows Rick's lead. He questions Rick's decisions and makes his own choices. The show's willingness to resolve long-running mysteries while creating new ones keeps the narrative moving forward. The evil Morty storyline reached a conclusion while leaving room for potential future appearances. Rick's confrontation with Rick Prime resolved his revenge quest while opening questions about what Rick does next. The destruction of the central finite curve changed the show's cosmology while creating new possibilities for stories. Rick and Morty continues to be popular and culturally relevant. The show maintains strong viewership despite airing more than a decade after its premiere. New episodes generate discussion and analysis. The show has influenced other animated comedies and has become a reference point in pop culture. Characters, quotes, and concepts from Rick and Morty appear throughout internet culture. The guarantee of seasons extending through Season 10 means the show will continue for several more years. This extended future allows the show to tell longer stories and develop characters more gradually. The creators don't have to worry about rushing to conclusions or leaving storylines unresolved. The show can take its time, exploring ideas and character relationships. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. 7 seasons of adventures, trauma, growth, and multiverse chaos have built toward understanding what Rick and Morty actually means beneath all the science fiction concepts and crude humor. Section 12. Meaning and Legacy. Rick and Morty began as a science fiction comedy about a genius scientist taking his grandson on dangerous adventures across infinite dimensions. Over 7 seasons and more than 70 episodes, it evolved into something more complex and emotionally sophisticated. The show uses its science fiction premise to explore genuine questions about existence, meaning, family, trauma, and what it means to be human in a universe that seems to render individual lives meaningless. What started as crude humor and outrageous situations gradually revealed deeper themes about how people find purpose in their lives and whether anything can truly matter in an infinite multiverse. The core theme of Rick and Morty involves the tension between nihilism and meaning. Rick represents pure nihilism taken to its logical extreme. He believes nothing matters because infinite dimensions mean that every possible outcome happens somewhere. Any choice you make, any person you love, any achievement you accomplish exists in infinite variations across the multiverse. This renders individual choices meaningless from a cosmic perspective. Rick uses this philosophy to justify treating people badly and avoiding emotional connection. He tells Morty repeatedly throughout the series that caring about anything is pointless because nothing has lasting significance in the grand scheme of existence. However, the show consistently demonstrates that Rick's nihilism is a defense mechanism rather than a genuine philosophical position. Rick claims nothing matters, yet his actions reveal that he cares deeply about specific things and people. Rick built the central finite curve because he couldn't handle dimensions where he wasn't special. This act alone contradicts his stated philosophy. If nothing truly mattered to Rick, he wouldn't need to create an artificial boundary protecting his ego from the reality that infinite versions of himself exist who are ordinary, or even failures. Rick spent years hunting the Rick who killed his family, because that loss mattered to him profoundly. If his wife and daughter were truly meaningless and replaceable, Rick wouldn't have dedicated so much of his life to revenge. Rick repeatedly saves his family from danger when he could easily abandon them for a replacement family in another dimension. He's demonstrated this ability by replacing himself and Morty in Rick Potion number 9. The show established early on that Rick could simply move to a new dimension whenever his current family became inconvenient. Yet Rick continues protecting this specific family across multiple seasons. In The Wedding Squanchers, Rick surrenders himself to the Galactic Federation to save his family from imprisonment. This sacrifice represents a major character moment because it shows Rick choosing his family's freedom over his own, directly contradicting his claims that nothing matters and no one is special. Morty represents the opposite approach to existence. Morty believes that choices matter, that people matter, and that right and wrong are real concepts worth caring about. Morty maintains his empathy and moral framework despite Rick's constant attempts to convince him that nothing matters. Episodes like Morty Night Run show Morty making moral choices even when those choices are difficult or lead to bad outcomes. Morty rescues Fart because he believes all life is valuable, even though this decision forces him to kill Fart later when he learns Fart's species plans to commit genocide against all carbon-based life. Morty doesn't abandon his moral framework after learning that moral choices are complicated and sometimes lead to terrible outcomes. He continues believing that trying to do right matters, even when outcomes are uncertain. The show suggests, through Morty, that meaning is something you create through your choices and relationships, rather than something that exists objectively in the universe. Morty's approach to existence is validated by the show's structure in subtle ways. Episodes where Morty acts according to his values tend to result in outcomes that Morty can live with psychologically, even when they're not perfect. Episodes where Morty adopts Rick's nihilistic approach or acts without his usual empathy tend to result in Morty being miserable or traumatized. Look Who's Purging Now shows what happens when Morty embraces violence and cruelty. He becomes capable of killing people with enjoyment, which horrifies him once he calms down and realizes what he's done. The family dynamics in Rick and Morty reflect real struggles that families experience, made more visible through the exaggerated science fiction scenarios. Beth deals with abandonment issues from Rick leaving when she was young. Her entire adult life has been shaped by her father's absence. She chose to marry Jerry and have children partly because she was creating the stable family structure she never had as a child. Beth questions whether she made the right choices in life and wonders what she could have been if she'd made different decisions. The Clone Beth storyline in Season 3 explores this directly by presenting Beth with the option of living an alternate life through a replacement while a clone takes over her current responsibilities. Jerry struggles with feeling inadequate and unimportant throughout the series. He knows his family doesn't respect him, and that Rick especially treats him with contempt. Jerry compensates through defensiveness and occasional cruelty. He asserts authority when he can, and tries to make himself feel important through his job and through demanding respect from his family. Jerry's character represents people who feel diminished by those around them, and who struggle to find their own value in a world where they feel overlooked and underestimated. Summer wants to be valued and recognized while also figuring out her own identity separate from her family's dysfunction. She starts the series as a typical teenager concerned with popularity and social status. Over time, Summer develops into someone more confident and capable. She proves herself on adventures and earns respect from Rick through demonstrated competence. Summer's arc shows someone growing from needing external validation to having genuine self-confidence based on what she knows she can do. These are real emotional problems that exist independent of the science fiction elements. The multiverse travel and alien encounters serve as metaphors for examining these issues. The show can explore abandonment, inadequacy, and identity through exaggerated scenarios that make the emotional truths more visible and more visceral. When Beth has to decide whether to leave a clone in her place, the show is exploring what it means to choose one life over another, and whether you can escape yourself by becoming someone else. Rick's character arc across 7 seasons involves learning to let people in despite his fear of loss and pain. Rick lost his original family and spent years consumed by revenge. This trauma defined who Rick became. He chose to join a replacement family and tried to maintain emotional distance from them so he wouldn't be hurt again if he lost them. However, Rick gradually becomes more emotionally invested despite his resistance. He comes to genuinely care about Beth, Morty, Summer, and even Jerry in his own complicated way. Rick's growth involves accepting that caring about people makes you vulnerable to being hurt, and that vulnerability is the price of genuine connection. Episodes in later seasons show Rick making sacrifices for his family that Season 1 Rick would never have made. Rick surrendering to the Galactic Federation in the Wedding Squanchers represents an early example of Rick choosing his family over his own freedom. Later examples become more frequent as Rick's emotional walls gradually break down. In the Rick, Churi, and Morty date, Rick almost destroys his relationship with Morty entirely through his need to prove he's more important than the president. Rick realizes he's pushed too far and has to genuinely apologize and change his behavior to repair the relationship. The show explores trauma and how people carry psychological damage with them throughout their lives. Morty accumulates trauma from his adventures that affects him in lasting ways. He buries his own corpse in Season 1, and that image haunts him. He kills people in various episodes and has to process what that means about who he is as a person. He watches friends die and experiences betrayal repeatedly. This trauma doesn't disappear between episodes. It accumulates and changes Morty fundamentally over the course of the series. Beth carries trauma from Rick abandoning her as a child. Her entire personality is shaped by growing up without her father and wondering why she wasn't enough to make him stay. When Rick returns and becomes part of her life again, Beth prioritizes keeping him around even when doing so harms her marriage and her children. Beth's desperation to maintain a relationship with Rick stems from childhood trauma that never properly healed. The show doesn't treat this as something Beth can simply get over. It's part of who she is. Rick carries trauma from losing his wife and daughter to violence. This loss changed Rick from someone who was apparently happy and normal into the cynical genius viewers see throughout the series. Rick's entire approach to existence developed as a response to unbearable loss. His nihilism protects him from feeling that kind of pain again. The show doesn't treat trauma as something that can be easily fixed or overcome. Instead, it shows characters living with their psychological damage and trying to function despite it. Evil Morty represents what happens when someone in the Rick and Morty universe rejects the system entirely. He recognized that the multiverse was structured to benefit Rick's at Morty's expense. He saw through Rick's philosophy and understood it as self-serving rationalization rather than genuine wisdom. Evil Morty escaped by being willing to destroy everything in his way. He killed thousands of Ricks and Mortys at the Citadel to achieve his goal of escaping the central finite curve. His character asks whether revolutionary change requires revolutionary methods, and whether escape from oppressive systems justifies the harm caused in that escape. The central finite curve revelation recontextualizes the show's entire premise. Everything that happened in Rick and Morty occurred within an artificial boundary that Rick helped create to protect his ego. The infinite possibilities presented in the show were actually limited possibilities within a cage. This meta-commentary on the show itself suggests that even stories about infinite possibilities are constrained by the assumptions and limitations of their creators. Rick and Morty is itself a show with boundaries and rules, despite pretending to be about infinite freedom. Rick and Morty's impact on popular culture extends beyond just being a successful animated show. The show influenced how people talk about multiverse concepts in popular media. It made certain philosophical ideas more accessible to mainstream audiences. The show's characters, quotes, and concepts appear throughout meme culture and online communication. The show demonstrated that adult animated comedies could be emotionally sophisticated while maintaining crude humor and science fiction concepts. The voice actor recasting in Season 7 proved that Rick and Morty had become bigger than any individual involved in creating it. The show survived losing one of its co-creators and the voice of both main characters. This demonstrates the strength of the show's writing, concepts, and characters. The show has an identity that exists independently of any single person. The transition was handled smoothly enough that the show maintained its audience and its quality through a change that could have destroyed a lesser show. The relationship between Rick and Morty serves as the emotional core that grounds all the multiverse chaos. Their relationship is complicated and often unhealthy. Rick manipulates Morty, traumatizes him, and treats him dismissively. Morty enables Rick's worst behaviors and struggles to establish boundaries. However, they also genuinely care about each other in ways that transcend the harm they cause. Their relationship evolves from Rick dragging Morty along on adventures to them functioning as partners who make decisions together. Ultimately, Rick and Morty argues that meaning exists in the connections we form with other people and in the choices we make, even if those connections and choices seem insignificant from a cosmic perspective. The show suggests that nihilism is intellectually defensible, yet emotionally unsustainable. Living as though nothing matters makes existence hollow and painful. Finding or creating meaning through relationships and purpose makes life bearable, even in an uncaring universe. This message emerges across 7 seasons of adventures, trauma, growth, and family dysfunction. Rick's gradual acceptance of emotional connection, despite his philosophical resistance, proves that humans need meaning even when logic suggests meaning is illusory. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.